The enemy commander laughed when he heard Americans were pinned down on the ridge. He laughed and lit a cigarette and told his men to take their time because those soldiers weren't going anywhere. He said it like a man who had never once been wrong about death, like a man who believed God himself had handed him this mountain. 12 of America's finest operators were bleeding, trapped, and running out of options, and somewhere in the fog above them, something was already watching him back. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The call came in at 0347 hours. Not a formal radio transmission, not a coded signal or a carefully worded intelligence report, just a voice ragged, low, barely controlled, cutting through static on a restricted military frequency somewhere deep in the Colorado Rockies. Griffin 1 to command, we are compromised. I say again, we are compromised. Enemy has eyes on our position. We are taking accurate fire from an unknown number of shooters at distance. Casualties are possible. Request immediate support. There was a pause. Then another voice on the channel, older, steadier, the kind of voice that had delivered bad news to grieving families more times than any man should ever have to. Griffin 1 command copies. What is your current status? Lieutenant Daniel Walker pressed his back against a boulder that had already stopped 2 rounds. He could feel the vibration of each impact in his spine. The rock was warm in some places where the bullets had kissed it. He pulled his knees up, checked the men on his immediate left and right, and did the calculation that every team leader dreads most in the world. 12 men, 9 positions confirmed, 3 men he couldn't see. Status is critical, he said into the radio. I have 3 unaccounted. Enemy shooters are on the northern ridge line, estimated distance 21 to 2,300 meters. We cannot identify exact positions. Fog is reducing visibility to approximately 60 meters at our elevation. We are effectively blind command. The response was silence. Not the silence of incompetence. The silence of a man on the other end of a radio who understood perfectly and completely that there was nothing in the American military inventory that could reach that ridgeline fast enough to matter. No air support through this cloud cover. No artillery cleared for this terrain. No rapid reaction force within 40 minutes of their position. 40 minutes. Daniel Walker looked at the sky. Then he looked at the men he could see. Chief Ryan Mitchell was 6 feet to his left, pressed flat behind a natural shelf of granite. His rifle pointed at nothing because there was nothing to point it at. Petty Officer James Tanner was bleeding from a cut above his left eye. Not a bullet wound, just rock fragmentation from a near miss. But blood was blood, and it was running into his eye, and he kept wiping it away with the back of his glove. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb was 3 positions down, and Daniel could see his lips moving. Webb was the team's forward observer. He was doing what forward observers do. He was trying to find something to shoot at. His binoculars swept the northern ridge again and again and again, and Daniel could tell by the set of his jaw that Webb wasn't finding anything worth finding. They were being hunted by ghosts. Professional ghosts. Daniel Walker had been in the SEAL teams for 9 years. He had operated in Afghanistan and Iraq, in 3 countries he was not legally permitted to name. He had been shot at by men who knew what they were doing. He had been ambushed by fighters who were smarter than anyone in Washington wanted to admit. He had been in situations that should have killed him, and he had survived all of them through a combination of training, discipline, and he would privately admit luck that no rational man deserved. But this felt different. This felt like being inside a kill box designed by someone who understood exactly how SEAL teams moved, exactly how they reacted under fire, exactly where they would seek cover, and exactly how long they could sustain their position before making a mistake. The shots were not panicked. They were not suppressive fire from nervous fighters trying to keep heads down. Each round was placed, deliberate, patient, like someone was taking their time reading the battlefield, choosing their moments. That was the thing that bothered Daniel Walker most, the patience. Mitchell, he said, keeping his voice flat and professional, because the men around him were reading his tone the same way musicians read a conductor, and if he let fear into his voice, it would move through the team like a virus. What are you seeing? Nothing, Mitchell said, which means they're good, or they're using the fog, probably both. Webb, northern ridgeline between 11 and 1 o'clock from our position. That's where the fire is originating. But the exact positions, Webb shook his head slowly. They're either in defilade or they've got excellent natural concealment. I cannot locate them, Lieutenant. Tanner, how's the eye? It's fine, sir, it's fine. Tell me what to do. That was Tanner all over. 24 years old, 3 deployments, and the first thing he said when he was bleeding was, "Tell me what to do." Daniel felt a complicated emotion move through his chest, something between pride and dread, and he pushed it down where it belonged. "Keep it covered. Rest your trigger hand." He looked back at the ridge. 2,200 meters, roughly 1.5 miles. In ideal conditions with a precision rifle system and a skilled operator, a long-range engagement at that distance was possible but extraordinarily difficult. Wind temperature, humidity, elevation. The rotation of the Earth, every variable multiplied the challenge. At this elevation with this fog, with unknown wind conditions, and the enemy already in prepared positions, he ran through his options for the 4th time in 10 minutes. There were no good options. There were only options that got people killed quickly and options that got people killed slowly, and Daniel Walker had spent 9 years learning to tell the difference. "Command," he said into the radio, "what is the ETA on any available air support, any asset? I don't care what kind. Griffin 1, all available close air support on is diverted. Weather is your enemy right now as much as the shooters. We are working the problem." Working the problem. Military language for "we don't have an answer yet." He clicked off the radio. Mitchell had crawled to his position. The chief was a big man, 6'2", 220 forearms like bridge cables. But he moved with the kind of economy that large men develop after years of learning. That size means nothing if noise gives you away. He settled beside Daniel and looked at him with the expression that senior enlisted men reserve for officers when they're about to say something the officer doesn't want to hear. "We need to talk about our options," Mitchell said. "I know what our options are. Then you know none of them are good." "I know. We can try to move south along the ridge to the lower saddle. That buys us 200 meters of concealment from their angle, but it exposes us during the traverse. 8 men crossing that open ground before the fog closes that gap." Mitchell made a small gesture that communicated everything without saying it. "I'm not moving the team in this." "I know. I'm not suggesting it. I'm telling you what we have." "What else?" "We wait for the fog to clear and try to identify their positions. But if the fog clears, they see us better too. We've been pinned here for 20 minutes. They know our exact position. We do not know theirs." "What else?" Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "That's the list, Lieutenant." Daniel looked at the fog. It was dense and white, and it moved in slow, strange patterns between the peaks, thicker in some places than others, occasionally thinning to reveal a glimpse of ridge or rock or sky before closing again, like a curtain drawn by a deliberate hand. He had seen fog like this in Scotland once on a training exercise. He had thought it was beautiful then. Now it felt like a shroud. He was still looking at the fog when it moved. Not the way fog normally moves, drifting, gradual atmospheric. It moved with purpose. A channel opened between 2 dense walls of white, and for just a moment the opening stretched back into the mountain terrain to the south of their position. And something was standing in it. Daniel blinked, a human figure, standing completely still in the gap in the fog, wearing camouflage that blended the mountainside so precisely that if the figure hadn't moved a single slow step forward, he might have thought he was seeing things. Might have blamed exhaustion or stress or the brain's tendency to manufacture patterns in chaos. But the figure moved again, and it was carrying a rifle. "Contact," Daniel said, and his hand moved to his weapon before his brain had finished processing the information, because 9 years of training had made certain responses automatic, and contact was the word, and the reflex was the reflex. "Hold," Mitchell said sharply. "Hold, she's waving." She. Daniel saw it now. The figure had raised one hand, palm flat, finger spread. The universal gesture for stop, for I am not hostile, for please do not shoot me before I can explain. The other hand held the rifle pointed straight down at the ground barrel toward the earth. The deliberate posture of someone who understood exactly how much that body language communicated to trained soldiers. "Is she alone?" Daniel asked. "Looks that way." "Where did she come from?" "I have absolutely no idea," Mitchell said. The figure walked toward them, slowly, purposefully, no hesitation but no aggression either. She moved the way a person moves when they know they are doing something dangerous and have decided to do it anyway because the alternative is worse. When she was close enough that Daniel could see her face through the fog, he held up his fist, the command to stop, and she stopped. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30. Her face was weathered in the specific way that outdoor operations weather a face not aged exactly, but finished. Like someone had taken a person who was already capable and put them through a process that removed everything unnecessary and left only what worked. Her eyes were dark and very calm, the kind of calm that is not the absence of awareness, but the product of complete situational understanding. Around her neck, a set of high-powered optics. At her hip, a secondary weapon. On her back, a pack that Daniel could tell, by the way it hung, had been carefully weighted and balanced over days, not hours. And in her right hand, pointed at the ground, a precision long-range sniper rifle that Daniel recognized immediately, and that made Chief Ryan Mitchell, standing beside him, exhale through his teeth in a way that was not quite a whistle. "Who are you?" Daniel said. The woman looked at him. Then she looked at the ridge to the north. Then she looked back at him, and something in her expression said she had already assessed the entire situation before she walked out of that fog, and her assessment matched his in every important particular, and she was not here to compare notes. "Staff Sergeant Claire Reynolds," she said. Her voice was quiet and steady. "Long-range reconnaissance attached to the 75th Ranger Support Element. I've been forward of your position for 4 days running an independent observation mission. You've been out here 4 days alone. 3.5. The last 12 hours I've been watching your situation develop." That hit Daniel like a physical thing. She had been watching. She had seen them take position. She had seen the enemy establish their firing lines. She had watched 12 of the most highly trained operators in the American military get systematically pinned down, and she had waited 4 hours, 5 hours, however long it had been, and she had assessed and calculated, and then she had walked out of the fog to have a conversation. "Why didn't you communicate earlier?" The question came out sharper than he intended. She didn't flinch. "Because for the first 3 hours I was gathering the information I needed. And because I wasn't sure yet whether I could actually help. I don't wave my hand until I know what I'm promising." Mitchell made a sound, not a laugh, something more complicated than a laugh. "Fair enough," he said mostly to himself. "What's your observation?" Daniel asked. Claire lowered herself into a natural depression in the rock, not sitting exactly, but reducing her profile without being told to, and she looked at him steadily. "You have 4 shooters on the northern ridgeline, not 8, not 12-4. They're using a rotation system. 2 shooting, 2 resting, and moving to secondary positions to confuse your identification. The reason Webb can't locate them is they're not where they were. They've been shifting approximately 60 to 80 meters laterally every 7 to 10 minutes. It looks like random fire from 8 different positions. It's actually disciplined fire from 4 men who know what they're doing." Daniel looked at Mitchell. Mitchell looked at Daniel. "The commander's compound," Daniel said, "still occupied. I have eyes on 2 vehicle positions on the western approach. They have an escape route identified. If this engagement continues another 40 minutes without resolution, there is a very high probability the primary target departs via the western route while his men keep you occupied. This engagement is not about killing your team. It's about buying time." The full weight of what she was saying settled over Daniel Walker like the fog itself. They hadn't been caught. They had been caught on purpose. The enemy commander had known Griffin team was in the area, had known their general route, and had positioned his men not to destroy them, but to tie them down long enough for him to ghost. "Range to the primary shooters," Daniel asked. "The furthest active position is at 2,100 meters. The closest is at 1,900. Can you engage them?" She looked at him for a moment that lasted exactly long enough to let him understand she had already answered this question for herself before she walked out of the fog. "That's why I'm here," she said. "That's a 2,000-meter shot in this fog, with unknown wind at elevation. I've been studying the wind conditions on this ridge for 4 days," she said. "I have thermal differentials mapped for every section of this valley. I know how the fog moves and why. I know the temperature gradient from the eastern face to the western drainage." She paused. "Lieutenant, I wouldn't be standing here if I thought the answer was no." Chief Mitchell leaned slightly forward. "What's your longest confirmed engagement?" She looked at him. There was something in her expression that wasn't quite a smile. "Previous to today, 1,700 meters. In Kandahar Province, 2018. 2,000 meters is different from 1,700, Mitchell said. "Every meter is different from every other meter," she said. "That's the whole point. Daniel Walker made a decision. He had been in the situations before where you could feel the exact moment when the weight of a choice landed on you. When the calculation completed and you understood what you were going to do and why you were going to do it and what it would cost if you were wrong. He had felt it in Ramadi. He had felt it outside Kunduz. He felt it now on a fog-covered ridge in Colorado, looking at a woman he had never met, who had spent 4 days alone in the mountains preparing for a conversation she was now having. Set up your position, he said. I already have one, she said, and she pointed not where they were standing, but 7 meters back and slightly elevated, where a natural rock formation created a platform that Daniel had noted earlier as a good observation point, but had been unable to occupy under fire. You set your position while we were talking. I set my position before I came out of the fog, she said. I wanted to talk first. I found it goes better. Petty Officer Tanner, who had been listening from his position with blood still drying on his face, made a sound that in different circumstances might have been a laugh. I like her, he said. You don't have a vote, Daniel told him. He looked at Claire Reynolds. Tell me what you need. She was already moving, not toward the position she'd identified not yet. First, she pulled out a small notebook, the kind with waterproof pages, and she opened it to a section that was dense with handwritten calculations. Temperature readings, elevation measurements, wind observation notes recorded by time of day. 4 days of work compressed into 24 pages of careful, precise documentation. I need the team to maintain their current positions, she said, scanning her notes. Not because you're hidden, they know exactly where you are. But because if you move the enemy, shooters will shift their positions to compensate and I lose my firing solutions. I need them to stay exactly where they think they have you pinned. You're using us as bait, Mitchell said. I'm using your position as an anchor point for their psychology, she said. Yes. Mitchell looked at Daniel. Daniel nodded. What else? Daniel said. Nobody fires, not at anything, even if you think you see something, especially if you think you see something. The moment one of your team fires their shooters, go to alternative positions and I have to start over. Understood. Give me radio silence for 8 minutes. No transmissions. Their position is close enough to our frequency ranges that I don't want any additional signal traffic. Done. She looked at him one more time. If the fog closes between my position and the target area before I complete the engagement, we stop and reassess. I won't take a shot I'm not certain of. If I'm not certain, I'll tell you. I appreciate that. I'm not telling you for appreciation, she said without heat. I'm telling you because you need to understand what the parameters are. This isn't a guarantee. This is a probability calculation that I believe comes out in our favor. What probability? She considered the question with a seriousness that some officers might have found unsettling. Claire Reynolds was clearly a person who did not give comfortable answers in place of honest ones. 78% given current conditions, she said. Conditions change, the number changes. The fog is my biggest variable. Everything else I can account for. 78%, Daniel said. Yes. Most people would say 90. Most people would be wrong, she said. I'd rather give you a number I can defend. She moved to her position then, and the SEAL team watched her go, watched her settle into that rocky platform with the precise economy of someone who had done this before and knew the exact relationship between her body and the ground and the rifle and the mathematics of air and distance. And there was something in watching it that made several of the most highly trained military personnel in the world feel something they rarely felt and rarely admitted to feeling. A kind of stillness. The kind that comes not from peace, but from the presence of absolute competence. Webb leaned to the man beside him. She spent 4 days alone out here, he said quietly. 4 days. I know. Who does that? Nobody answered because they were all watching Claire Reynolds place her eye behind her, scope breathe once long and slow and deliberate, and begin the process of measuring the world between herself and the men who were trying to kill her teammates. The fog drifted. The mountain was silent. Daniel Walker pressed his back against the boulder that had stopped 2 rounds, held his radio in his left hand, and watched 78% become either everything or nothing. 7 meters away, Claire Reynolds was having a different kind of conversation entirely. No words, no back and forth, no negotiation, just the fundamental, ancient, terrible arithmetic of distance. She looked through the scope, she breathed. She had studied this ridge for 4 days and she knew its rhythms. The way a sailor knows the rhythms of a particular stretch of ocean, not perfect knowledge, but intimate knowledge, the kind of knowledge that only comes from sustained, patient, unbroken attention. The fog shifted. She saw him, not a full figure, not a clean silhouette, a fraction of a shape, an elbow, a shoulder, the edge of a rifle barrel catching a thread of cold mountain light. At 2,100 meters, that was everything she needed. Her finger rested on the trigger guard. Not the trigger, the guard, because the shot was not ready yet. The shot would be ready when every variable she had been measuring for 4 days, aligned with a single variable she couldn't completely control, the exact, unrepeatable, unique moment when this particular wind, at this particular temperature, moving through this particular column of air, created conditions she could send a bullet through with confidence. The mountain breathed. She breathed. She waited. Daniel Walker, 7 meters away, had not moved in 4 minutes, not because he was ordered not to, because he couldn't, because something about watching Claire Reynolds work created in him an involuntary stillness, the stillness you feel watching a tightrope walker, watching a surgeon, watching anyone doing something that requires such complete commitment that breathing near them feels like an intrusion. Chief Mitchell was beside him again. He hadn't said anything in 6 minutes. He was just watching. The fog moved. The rifle fired. The sound was enormous, and then it was gone, absorbed by the mountains. The way mountains absorb everything by continuing to exist unmoved, indifferent, eternal. The echo came back 3 seconds later from the far ridge, and then there was silence. They couldn't see the impact from this range. They waited. 10 seconds. 20. Northern ridgeline, 11 o'clock position. Webb said, his voice careful and measured. No movement. Previous position was active. Now it's not. Nobody spoke. Claire was already repositioning, not dramatically, not in any way that would read as excitement. A small adjustment, deliberate and economical. She was already reading her notes, already recalculating. 1 down, she said. Her voice was completely level. Daniel looked at Mitchell. Mitchell's expression was something that in 9 years Daniel Walker had never quite seen on his chief's face. It was something very close to awe. 2 more primary shooters, Claire said, not looking up from her scope. And then we have a problem. What problem? The target, she said. He just started moving. The target was moving. Those 4 words landed in Daniel Walker's chest like a dropped stone hitting deep water. He felt the ripple of it move through him. Not panic, not yet, but the specific dread of a mission, shifting from difficult to catastrophic in the span of a single sentence. What do you mean he's moving, he said, and even as he said it, he knew it was a foolish question because Claire Reynolds did not speak in riddles, and she did not offer information she hadn't already verified. She meant exactly what she said. The man they had come all this way to find, the man whose capture or elimination was the entire reason 12 SEAL operators were currently bleeding and pinned on a Colorado ridgeline, was leaving. Western vehicle position, Claire said. She had not moved from her scope. Her voice was flat and information dense, the voice of someone who had trained herself to communicate under pressure with 0 wasted syllables. 1 vehicle is warming. I can see exhaust. Driver's side door opened and closed 30 seconds ago. If the pattern holds and based on 4 days of observation, I believe it will. Departure is between 6 and 10 minutes from now. Daniel looked at Mitchell. Mitchell said 1 word, how team. Through the western drainage, Claire said. There's a logging road that connects to a state highway approximately 11 miles out. Once he reaches the highway, he disappears into civilian traffic, and this operation is finished. Not paused. Finished. Daniel pressed himself against the boulder and did the mathematics of impossible choices. The compound was approximately 3 miles from their current position. The team was pinned under accurate long-range fire. Even if Claire took out the remaining shooters in the next 30 seconds, which was not a reasonable expectation under any definition of the word, the team would still need to move 3 miles of mountain terrain breach, a defended compound, and intercept a vehicle before it reached a highway. 6 to 10 minutes. 3 miles. It couldn't be done. Tell me there's another option, Daniel said. There's one, she said. What? The shot. He let that settle. He looked at his watch without quite seeing it. He looked at the phone. He looked at Mitchell, who was already doing the same mathematics and arriving at the same destination. The vehicle, Daniel said. You want to engage the vehicle? Not the vehicle, the driver. Single precision shot vehicle is disabled immediately. It buys time for the assault force to reposition and approach on foot. Range. From my current position to the Western vehicle approach. She paused, and even from 7 meters away, Daniel could see the micro adjustment she made to her scope. 2,640 meters. Silence. Webb, from his position, 3 meters away, made a sound that was not quite a word, just a sound. The sound of a man who had been a forward observer for 8 years confronting a number that exceeded his professional frame of reference. 2,600, Mitchell said, and 40 meters, Claire completed. She still hadn't moved. Yes, Claire. Daniel used her first name without intending to. I need you to understand that I'm not questioning your ability, but that distance is not a world record, she said. It is far. It is extraordinarily difficult. It will require conditions to cooperate in ways I cannot fully guarantee. But it is not outside the range of what is physically possible with this system in these conditions. She paused. And it is the only option that addresses both problems simultaneously. The remaining 2 shooters on the ridge, they will respond to a vehicle shot by going to emergency extract positions. I know those positions because I've been watching them prepare those positions for 4 days. If they go to extract, they come to me, not away from me. I can take the engagement distance down from 2,000 meters to somewhere between 900 and 1,200. Daniel stared at her back. You planned this, he said. She turned her head just slightly, just enough to make eye contact over her shoulder. I planned a version of this. Situations change. The principle holds. The principle, Mitchell repeated. Bring the problem to you. Don't chase the problem. If you chase it, you get exhausted and you make mistakes. If you make the problem come to you, you fight on terrain you've already mapped. For a moment, a brief, strange moment on a fog-covered Colorado ridge, with rounds occasionally still cracking off the rocks above their head, Daniel Walker felt something that had nothing to do with tactics or mathematics or probability calculations. He felt curious. The pure, clean curiosity of encountering a mind that worked differently from any mind he had encountered before. How long have you been planning this, he said. Since the second day, she said. When I identified the Western vehicle position and understood what it was for, you knew he was going to run. He always runs, she said. That's how he's survived this long. He doesn't fight to win. He fights to create enough chaos to disappear. His men on that ridge are not trying to defeat you. They were never trying to defeat you. They're trying to maintain chaos long enough for him to be gone. She turned back to her scope, which means the only way to stop him is to do something that chaos cannot account for. Something like a 2,600-meter shot, Daniel said. Something exactly like that, she said. He made the decision. He made it the way he made all command decisions under pressure, not because he was certain, but because the alternative to deciding was watching the mission end without a decision being made, which was its own kind of choice and a worse one. Do it, he said. I need 4 minutes, she said. You have 6. Then I'll take 4, she said. 4 is more honest. What followed was the strangest 4 minutes of Daniel Walker's professional life. The shooting from the ridge continued, intermittent, deliberate, round after round, keeping the team's heads down, and the team maintained their positions the way Claire had requested, enduring fire without returning it, which went against every instinct 9 years of combat training had built into Daniel's nervous system. Every impact on the rocks around them felt like a personal insult. Every second of silence felt like falling. But he watched Claire Reynolds work, and watching her work was an education. She was not rushing. That was the first thing. Under conditions that would have accelerated most people's time pressure lives at stake, an enemy preparing to escape, she was not rushing. She moved through her preparation with the same measured pace she would have used in a training environment. And Daniel gradually understood that this was not calm exactly. It was control. The difference was important. Calm implied the absence of pressure. Control implied the presence of pressure and the decision to not let it dictate your pace. She checked her notes 3 times, not 2, 3. Each check was different. First, the environmental data, temperature and elevation, and the way she'd logged the wind behavior at this specific time of morning on this specific exposure of mountain. Second check was the ballistic calculations she'd done by hand, a column of figures that Daniel couldn't read from his angle, but that went on for half a page. Third check was something else, something more personal. She was reading something she'd written that wasn't numbers. Later, when he had time to think about it, he would wonder what that was. Webb, she said without raising her voice. Reynolds, Webb answered. I need a wind call at distance. Use your spotter scope on the vegetation line at approximately 1,200 meters south-southwest. That's the most reliable wind indicator on this side of the valley. Webb was already moving to do it. What am I calling direction and speed? 3 readings 30 seconds apart. Give me an average. Copy. Webb pressed his eye to his spotting scope, waited. First call, 270 degrees, 8 to 10 miles per hour. 30 seconds. Second call, 265 degrees, 9 miles per hour. Another 30 seconds. Third call, 270, 8 miles per hour. Average 268, 8.5, Claire said, and Daniel heard her making a notation. Thank you. That's the most polite anyone's ever asked me to do anything in a combat situation, Webb said. Manners cost nothing, she said. And I find people work better when you ask nicely. Tanner, from his position, laughed despite himself. The laugh was short and immediately suppressed the laugh of a man who knows where he is and remembers but cannot help the involuntary response to something genuinely human in a situation that has stopped feeling human. 60 seconds, Claire said. Daniel pressed his back against the boulder. He looked at the sky. He thought about the compound 3 miles away. He thought about a man getting into a vehicle. Mitchell, he said quietly. Yeah. When this happens, if this works, we're going to be moving. Full speed, 3 miles mountain terrain. I need the team ready to go the second she fires. They're ready now, Mitchell said. They've been ready. They're just waiting for something to run toward. That was one of the things Daniel Walker had always valued most about Mitchell. He understood the team's psychology better than almost anyone. 12 men pinned under fire, unable to respond, unable to move. The pressure of inaction was its own kind of damage. They needed to move. They needed to go towards something. They had been waiting for permission, and the moment the shot happened, permission would arrive. 30 seconds, Claire said. The fog shifted. Daniel heard it before he saw it, a change in the quality of the air, a subtle pressure difference that meant the fog was moving, thinning the valley below, briefly opening to a clarity it hadn't offered all morning. The moment lasted perhaps 45 seconds, maybe less. It was enough. The rifle fired. The sound of it was extraordinary. Not loud in the way that nearby gunfire is loud, sudden, percussive, physically aggressive, but expansive, big. The sound of something traveling a very long way at very high speed through very thin air. The echo came back from 3 different directions as the sound bounced off the mountainsides, fragmenting the report into something that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Then silence. Not the silence before. A different silence. A silence with weight. Impact, Webb said. His voice was not excited, not amazed. It was the voice of a professional making a professional report. But his hands, which Daniel could see clearly from his position, were not quite steady. Vehicle, Daniel said. Webb shifted his spotter scope. Vehicle is stationary. Stationary, and he paused. The vehicle is not going anywhere, Lieutenant. Claire had already shifted position. The movement was fluid and immediate, like she had rehearsed this exact transition. Ridge shooters are responding, she said. Moving to extract positions. Correcting my earlier estimate, they're moving faster than I anticipated. Mitchell, what's the southern approach to the ridge look like from your angle? Cleared, Mitchell said, and there was something different in his voice now. A forward lean to it, a readiness. The chief of a SEAL team sensing movement after constraint. Terrain is passable. It's not fast, but it's passable. If they reach the first extract point, which is approximately 90 seconds out for them, at their current pace, my engagement distance drops to around 950 meters. That's a comfortable shot. But if they make it past the first extract point to the secondary position, how long, Daniel said? For them to reach secondary 4 minutes, maybe 3.5. Then we need to make a decision about movement. I'm not making your tactical decisions for you, Lieutenant, she said. But if you want my observation as a 4-day student of this terrain, moving south along the ridge for approximately 300 meters, before cutting east, would place your team in a position to address the compound from an angle the enemy has not defended well. I've been watching that eastern approach for 4 days, and I've seen exactly 2 people walk at once. You're saying the eastern face of the compound is soft. I'm saying it's softer than anything else they have, she said. But I want to be clear, I don't know what's inside. I've been watching approaches and external positions. What's inside the walls is your domain, not mine. Understood. Daniel turned to Mitchell. Griffin, prepare to move. South traverse 300 meters, then cut east. We have an opportunity and we have a time limit, and both of those are shrinking. Moving in 30, Mitchell said. Moving in 20. A sound moved through the team, not verbal, just physical. The click of equipment being checked, the shift of body weight from static to mobile, the collective exhalation of 12 men releasing the tension of enforced stillness. It was the sound Daniel Walker thought of a held breath. Reynolds, he said, yes. Once we're moving, I need you to maintain overwatch on the ridge positions. If any of those shooters try to follow our movement, I need to know. I'll be on the ridge, she said, but I want to tell you something before you go. He waited. She still hadn't looked away from her scope. The second shooter just reached the first extract position. He's looking at the vehicle. A pause. He knows what happened. He's making a radio call right now. Whatever forces they have left in the compound just received a report that the vehicle is down and their commander is trapped. So they know we're coming. They know something changed. Whether they know the compound is the next objective depends on how much information they share and how fast. She made a small adjustment to her scope. The second shooter is moving again, heading for secondary extract. I have a firing solution. Request permission to engage. Granted. The rifle fired again. This time Daniel was watching Webb's face when it happened. Webb was on his spotter scope reading the downrange impact through optics, and Daniel saw the exact moment the round connected, saw it in the micro-expression that moved across Webb's face like weather there and gone, before you could name it precisely but unmistakably real. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something more subdued, something that acknowledged what the shot meant without celebrating it. Down, Webb said. Third shooter is at secondary extract position, Claire said with no pause between the second confirmation and the third observation. He stopped. He heard the previous round. He's evaluating his options. Smart, Mitchell said. Very smart, Claire agreed, which means he's going to do something I can't fully predict. Smart people who understand what's happening to them become unpredictable. She paused. Which means your window to move is right now while his attention is on figuring out what just happened rather than on your ridge position. Griffin, we're moving, Daniel said. Now, go. They went. 12 men, coordinated movement, the kind of ground-eating pace that SEAL teams practice for thousands of hours until the movement itself becomes thoughtless. Just the body doing what the body knows while the mind focuses on the information coming in through the eyes and ears. Daniel moved with them, and as he moved, he held his radio up and kept the channel open to Claire's frequency. Talk to me, he said. Third shooter is moving back toward the ridgeline proper, she said. Her voice came through the radio with a slight distortion of compression, but still clear enough to follow. Not toward you. He's retreating inward. I think he's reassessing the situation. Meaning he's not sure what's happening. Meaning he's scared, she said. Scared is different from not sure. Scared people make decisions based on self-preservation. He might hold position. He might try to extract on his own. He might try to reach the compound on foot. If he reaches the compound, he warns them we're coming from the east. Yes. Can you intercept him before he gets there? A pause, the kind of pause that meant she was calculating something that wasn't simple. Possibly. His route to the compound, if he takes the obvious route, puts him in my line of sight for approximately 40 seconds at one point. I'd need him to take the obvious route. Will he? I don't know, she said. He's smart. Smart people sometimes take the obvious route because it's obvious for a reason. Sometimes they don't because they assume the obvious route is watched. I've been trying to read him for 4 days, and he's the one I'm least certain about. Daniel was moving at full pace now. The team spread behind and alongside him in the loose, responsive formation that covered ground quickly without bunching into a target. The terrain was rough. It was always rough at 9,000 feet, but manageable. The 300-meter south traverse was going well. 60 seconds in and they were halfway there. What's your recommendation, he said. Keep moving, she said. If he takes the obvious route, I'll handle it. If he doesn't, you'll deal with whatever he tells the compound when you get there. But stopping your movement to wait for a decision point that may not materialize, that's the worst option. Agreed. He looked at Mitchell running 6 feet to his right. Mitchell pace. We're good, Mitchell said. 2 minutes to the cut east. Tanner, how's the eye? Completely fine, sir. Can we please stop talking about my eye? Yes, Daniel said, and despite everything, he almost smiled. 110 seconds later, the team completed the south traverse and turned east. The terrain changed immediately, not easier, but different. The rocky, exposed ridgeline gave way to a mixture of broken granite and sparse mountain vegetation that provided more concealment, if not more speed. Daniel could feel the compound pulling at him. 3 miles, no less than 3 miles now. 2.5, 2. Reynolds, and he said into the radio, static. Reynolds, more static. Claire. The radio crackled. Here, had to reposition. Third shooter took the obvious route. I have him. Take him. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Done, she said. 3 shooters, 3 shots, 3 solutions to a problem that 40 minutes ago had seemed unsolvable. Daniel Walker ran east through the Colorado mountains and let himself feel briefly and carefully. Something approaching hope, not confidence. He had seen too many missions where hope arrived early and left in pieces. But hope. The quiet, provisional sense that the day might end differently than it had been threatening to end. Compound is 2,000 meters from your current position, Claire said. At your current pace, you'll reach the eastern approach in approximately 11 minutes. What are you seeing at the compound? Activity. They've received some kind of communication, my guess is from the remaining shooter, before I engaged him. There are now 3 visible personnel on the western perimeter who were not there before. Armed, looking west towards the vehicle position, not east. They don't know we're coming from the east. Not yet, she said, but the commander is still inside. After the vehicle was disabled, I saw him re-enter the main structure. He doesn't have an obvious escape route now, which means he's cornered, Daniel said, which means he's dangerous, she said. Cornered is not the same as captured. I know. Just making sure we have the same picture. They did. Daniel Walker had spent 9 years studying what happens to dangerous men when their options narrow. Some became calculating, cool, focused on the one remaining path. Some became erratic, emotional, capable of decisions no rational assessment of their situation would produce. The commander had survived long enough and run often enough to suggest he was the former type. But you could never be certain. Certainty was a luxury that combat had never offered Daniel Walker and never would. We'll be in position in 10 minutes, he said. Can you maintain overwatch on the eastern approach during our movement? I'm repositioning now to get a better angle on the eastern face, she said. Give me 4 minutes to establish the new position. There will be a gap in my coverage. Understood. We'll slow our approach. You don't need to slow significantly. The 4 minutes puts me in position before you're in range of the compound's eastern defenses. But if you hear me fire during that 4 minutes, we accelerate. Yes, she said. Exactly. The team moved east through the mountain terrain, and Daniel Walker thought about the person who had walked out of the fog 2 hours ago with a sniper rifle and a notebook full of 4 days of patient observation and a probability estimate of 78%. He thought about what it meant to spend 4 days alone in these mountains, in this cold, watching and calculating and waiting. Not waiting for rescue, not waiting for orders, waiting for the right moment. The moment when the information she had gathered matched a situation where using it could change something. He thought about the shot she'd taken. The first one, 2,100 meters through variable fog and mountain conditions after 4 days without sleep, that wasn't carefully rationed, and without food beyond what she'd carried on her back, and without any of the things that most people, even most soldiers, considered minimum requirements for sustained function. And then a second shot, and a third, and a shot at 2,640 meters that had stopped a vehicle and preserved the mission. She had told him 78% she had been underselling. Reynolds, he said, here. Why did you tell me 78%? A pause that surprised him. Not because she was uncertain, he was beginning to understand that uncertainty was not her default state, but because she was deciding whether to answer honestly or professionally. Because that was my honest assessment, she said, at the time. And now, looking back, another pause. 84, she said. The conditions cooperated slightly better than my baseline prediction. The fog movement was more favorable than I'd modeled. You modeled fog movement. 4 days of observation, she said. You learned the patterns. He ran east through the mountains. He shook his head slowly. He said, 8 minutes. I'll be ready, she said. And Lieutenant, yeah. The eastern approach. There's a gap in the perimeter wall, not a door, but a section where the original construction left a narrow space between two barrier panels. Approximately shoulder width. I found it day 3. I didn't know if it was relevant then. And now it might save you 90 seconds on your breach. He processed this. You've been cataloging approach options for a team you didn't know existed. I've been cataloging everything, she said. That's the job. Mitchell was beside him again, matching his pace close enough to speak quietly. You know what she's doing, right? What she actually is? Tell me. She's not just a sniper, Mitchell said. She's a battle manager. She came out here alone for 4 days and she built a picture of this entire engagement area. Positions, routes, timing, escape, options, defensive gaps. She built the entire picture, and then she waited for someone who needed it. Daniel Walker looked at his chief. Yeah, that's not a capability set I've seen before, Mitchell said. Not exactly like that. Not from one person alone. 4 days, no support. Neither have I. They ran. The compound's eastern face was growing in Daniel's operational awareness, the way targets always grew, not visually, but in the weight of attention, the forward pull of focus. 9 minutes. 8. Then the radio crackled. Not Claire's voice. A different frequency, the task force command channel. Griffin 1 command, be advised. We have intelligence indicating the compound may contain additional personnel not previously identified. Civilian or mixed status individuals in the northern structure. Confirm and adjust ROE if necessary. Daniel slowed slightly. Command Griffin 1 copies. Can you give me numbers? Negative. Intelligence is fragmentary. Proceed with caution. He looked at Mitchell. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Civilians in the compound changed the breach. It changed the pace, the approach, the ROE. It changed everything. He pressed the radio. Reynolds. I heard, she said. I was monitoring your command frequency. Did you observe any non-combatant presence in the compound during your 4 days? A pause. Not uncertainty she was pulling from memory against 4 days of compressed observation. Day 1, she said. I observed 3 individuals entering the northern structure who moved differently from the fighters. Different body language, different pace. They did not carry weapons. They were not restrained that I could see. But they did not move freely either. It was, she paused again. It was the movement of people who understood very clearly that they were not free to leave. Hostages, Daniel said. Possibly people with complex relationships to the commander's organization. I don't know. I only know they moved like people under constraint. He looked at the terrain ahead, 6 minutes into the eastern approach. He had a breach plan. He had a gap in the wall Claire had identified. He had 11 operators ready to move fast. He had a new variable, and it was the most dangerous kind of variable, human. Reynolds, he said, here. When we enter, I need you on the northern structure. If anyone exits anyone at all, I need to know before they're in the open. Understood. Lethal engagement only on confirmed hostile action, positive identification. That's always been my standard, she said quietly, without exception. 6 minutes. Daniel Walker looked at the men running beside and behind him. 12 operators, 3 miles of mountain crossed in 22 minutes. 1 enemy commander cornered in a compound with possible hostages in the northern structure and 3 exterior guards who didn't know they were coming from the east. The mission had been supposed to be simple. Somewhere in the mountains behind him, a woman who had spent 4 days alone in the Colorado wilderness without recognition, without support, without anyone knowing her name, was repositioning her rifle to cover the angle he needed covered. 4 minutes from now, she would be in position. 3 minutes after that, Griffin team would hit the eastern wall. And whatever was waiting inside that compound would find out what happened when the fog gave up its ghost. 3 minutes out from the eastern wall, Daniel Walker held up a closed fist and the entire team stopped. Not because of a threat, not because of incoming fire, because something felt wrong, and 9 years of operating in places where wrong feelings preceded catastrophic events had taught him to stop when that feeling arrived, identify it, and either resolve it or consciously accept it before moving forward. He pressed the radio. Reynolds, eastern approach. What are you seeing? The answer came back in 4 seconds. 3 guards on the western perimeter are still looking west. Nobody on the eastern face. But wait. a pause that lasted 2 seconds and felt like 20. The guard pattern just changed. The middle position on the western perimeter moved. He's relocating. I don't know why. Direction. South, along the western wall. He's not looking east, but he's moving in a way that puts him in a position to potentially observe the southern corner of the compound in approximately 90 seconds. Which means our angle of approach to the eastern gap gets compromised at the southern end. Possibly depends on how far south he goes. Daniel looked at Mitchell. Mitchell had heard the exchange and was already drawing a mental diagram that Daniel could see in his eyes, the spatial reasoning of a man who had done thousands of breaches and understood instinctively how guard movement translated into opportunity windows. 45-second window before we lose clean approach, Mitchell said quietly. Then we move in, 40 pawns, Daniel said. Reynolds were accelerating to contact, he said into the radio. Maintain overwatch on western perimeter. If that relocated guard turns east at any point before we're through the gap. I'll tell you immediately, she said. Go. They went. 40 seconds of coordinated movement. No communication, no commands, just 12 operators who had trained together long enough that the movement was its own language. Daniel felt the familiar compression of time that always happened in the final approach to an objective. The world narrowed. Peripheral details fell away. The gap in the eastern wall was 60 meters, then 40, then 20, and he could see it now, the irregular space between two barrier panels, exactly as Claire had described it, shoulder-width dark inside the kind of gap that exists not by design, but by the imperfect overlap of construction choices made by people who believed security meant the front, not the back. 12 meters. Western guard has stopped, Claire's voice in his earpiece. He's stationary, looking west again. You're clear. 8 meters. Go, Daniel said, and didn't stop to verify that anyone had heard because he could feel the team moving with him, feel the disciplined compression of 11 people, following one person through a narrow space in a specific order that had been trained until it was automatic. They went through the gap. The interior of the compound was exactly what it was, a collection of structures organized around the central functional reality of a man who moved often and needed to be able to move everything important in under 10 minutes. Daniel had seen compounds like this before, and the familiarity was its own kind of intelligence. He knew how they thought. He knew where the important things were kept. He knew the priority order of what people grabbed when they ran. 3 structures. Main structure directly ahead, largest. Northern structure to his left, smaller one visible entry point. Southern structure against the perimeter wall. Utility function probably storage or equipment. Mitchell south structure. Webb northern. Tanner with me on main. Everyone else split and clear in order. No one said yes. They just moved. And then everything happened at once. The guard from the western perimeter rounded the southern corner of the compound. He was not the guard who had relocated. He was a 4th guard, one that Claire hadn't counted because he had been inside a structure during every one of her observation windows and had walked out at exactly the wrong moment. He came around the corner and saw 11 SEAL operators who had not existed 30 seconds ago, and he made the decision that frightened trained fighters make in the first 2 seconds of an unexpected encounter, not fight, not flight, but sound. He opened his mouth. Petty Officer James Tanner blood still dried on the left side of his face, covered 20 feet in the time it took the guard to draw a breath and hit him in the throat with a forearm that said, I was born for this, before the man could make a sound. They went down together. Tanner was up in 2 seconds. The guard was not getting up for a while. Tanner, Daniel said. Completely fine, Tanner said. Can we keep moving? They kept moving. The main structure door was unlocked, not because the compound was careless, but because a man who might need to move fast in any direction does not lock the door he might need to exit through. Daniel hit it hard shoulder first, and the door opened into a room that contained one person. Not the commander. A young man, maybe 20 years old, sitting on the floor against the far wall, with his hands visible and his eyes wide, and his entire body broadcasting the universal posture of someone who has decided that survival means stillness. He was not armed. He was not moving. He was breathing very carefully, the deliberate breathing of someone managing terror. Daniel held position. Tanner covered the secondary entry. Martinez, the young man, non-hostile, do not engage. He moved through to the next room. The main structure was larger inside than the exterior suggested. 4 rooms plus a central corridor, and Daniel cleared them. The way the team cleared everything methodically, quickly, with the kind of systematic violence of action that is not aggression, but precision. Room 1 clear. Room 2 contained equipment, communications, gear maps, documentation that was going to be very interesting to someone in an office building in Virginia. Room 3 was sleeping quarters, empty. Room 4 was empty. He stopped, stood in the middle of the 4th room, and turned slowly and felt the wrongness arrive again. The same feeling that had made him stop on the approach, but sharper now and with an identifiable shape. The commander was not here. "Mitchell," he said into his radio, "main structure is clear. No primary target. Where are you?" "South structure clear." Mitchell's voice came back tight and professional. "Storage and comms equipment. No personnel." "Webb." A pause. A pause that was exactly 1 second longer than it should have been. "Webb," Daniel said again. "Northern structure," Webb said. "Lieutenant, you need to come here." The tone of Webb's voice was the thing. Daniel had served with Marcus Webb for 4 years. He had heard Webb's voice in every condition that combat produces: exhaustion, exhilaration, fear, fury, grief. This tone was something Daniel did not have a clean category for. It was not emergency. It was not distress. It was something quieter and more complicated. It was the voice of a man who had opened a door and found something that required a different kind of response than anything his training had specifically prepared him for. Daniel crossed the compound in 12 seconds. The northern structure's door was open. Webb was standing just inside, and the first thing Daniel saw was that Webb's weapon was lowered, not resting, not slung, but deliberately, consciously lowered. His trigger finger was alongside the frame, not on it. Then Daniel saw what was inside. 4 people, seated, wrists zip-tied to the support struts of 4 separate wall brackets. 2 men, 1 woman, 1 person who was not quite old enough to be certain about. All 4 looked at him with the specific expression of people who have stopped expecting rescue, but have not stopped hoping for it. The expression of people who have learned through painful experience that the difference between hoping and expecting matters enormously, and that confusing the two is its own kind of wound. "Hostile check," Daniel said. "Negative," Webb said. "No weapons, no threatening behavior. They've been restrained. The woman on the left has a wound on her forearm that looks 2, maybe 3 days old, untreated." He paused. "They haven't been given water in a while, I can tell." Daniel stepped inside. He looked at the 4 people. He looked at the way their restraints were attached, tight, professional. The kind of restraint applied by someone who had done it before and did not do unnecessary things. He looked at the older man closest to him, who was watching him with dark eyes that were exhausted and wary, and still beneath the wariness, frantically calculating. "We're United States military," Daniel said. "You're safe. We're going to get you out of here." The older man closed his eyes. Just for a second, and in that second, Daniel saw something move across his face that he had seen on faces in Mosul and Kandahar. In 3 countries, he was not permitted to name the expression of a person who has been holding themselves together through pure, sustained force of will, and has just received the information that they don't have to hold quite so hard anymore. It lasted 1 second, maybe less, and then the man opened his eyes and the calculation was back. "Hi is still here," the man said. His English was accented but precise. "The one you are looking for." He did not leave. Daniel went very still. "What?" "The vehicle, I heard it start, but he did not go. They tried to make us believe he was leaving. They wanted you to think." The man stopped, swallowed. "He is still in this compound. He is in the tunnel." "What tunnel?" The man looked toward the floor. Daniel looked at Webb. Webb was already moving to the wall, pressing his hand against the floor planks in the corner of the room in the 3rd plank. He pressed, shifted, not like a hidden door in a movie, not dramatically, but like something that had been opened many times and settled into the comfortable cooperation of regular use. It lifted. Beneath it, a space. And from the space, the particular quality of cold air that comes from underground passage, the earthy mineral cold of depth. "Reynolds," Daniel said into his radio, moving fast back out of the northern structure and scanning the compound. "Reynolds, I need you." "Here, what happened?" "Tunnel under the northern structure. Target is underground. I need you to look at the compound perimeter from your position and tell me every possible exit point that could connect to a tunnel system. Anywhere the ground looks disturbed, anywhere there's a structure or feature that could conceal an emergence point. Do it now. A pause that lasted 15 seconds. 15 seconds during which Daniel Walker stood in the center of the compound and felt the mission reassemble itself around a new geometry. I see two possibilities, Claire said. First is approximately 40 meters north-northwest of the compound perimeter. There's a low point in the terrain that creates a natural depression. I've looked at it multiple times over 4 days, and I always came back to it because of the way the vegetation pattern is slightly inconsistent. Different growth pattern from the surrounding area. It could be a spoil pile from tunnel construction that's been camouflaged. Second, 20 meters south of the southern structure, there's a rock formation that I initially logged as natural. But looking at it now with new information, a pause. One section is not the same color as the surrounding rock. It's very subtle, but it's there. Two possible exits, Daniel said, and we don't know which one he's taking. Or if there's a third that I haven't identified. Can you cover both from your current position? The pause told him the answer before she spoke it. No, she said, not simultaneously. The sight lines don't allow it. If I cover the northern depression, I lose the southern rock formation. If I cover the south, I lose the north. Daniel turned to Mitchell, who had arrived beside him without being summoned, because Mitchell had a talent for being where he was needed before he was asked for. Split the team, Daniel said. 2 elements, north and south of the compound perimeter. If he surfaces, we contain him before he can move. And if he comes up shooting, Mitchell said, then we respond accordingly. Daniel looked at his, but alive is the preference, Harinam. Alive is always the preference. Copy that, Mitchell said, and his tone said that he agreed with the preference and also that he understood the reality. Alive was the preference. Alive required the person in question to cooperate with the preference. And this particular person had demonstrated over the course of a long and violent career a consistent disinterest in other people's preferences. The team split, 6 north, 6 south, and Daniel moved to the northern element because his instinct, not analysis, just instinct, the accumulated pattern recognition of 9 years said north. He couldn't have explained it in a briefing. It was just the pull of something that his conscious mind hadn't finished processing, but his body already knew. Reynolds, I'm moving to the northern position. I need your eyes on both exit points. Alternate your observation. Give me a call every 30 seconds confirming status on each. Copy, she said. 30-second check alternating north and south, starting now. Northern depression is your priority. Understood. He moved north of the compound perimeter and positioned himself with Mitchell behind a natural feature that provided cover from the depression Claire had identified. The depression was 35 meters away. He could see the inconsistent vegetation she had described barely, and only because she had told him to look for it. Without that information, he would have walked past it without a second glance. 30 seconds. Northern depression, no movement, Claire said. Southern formation, no movement. 30 more seconds. Northern, no movement. Southern, no movement. Daniel's breathing was steady. His heart rate was controlled. He had been in more waiting positions than he could count, and the discipline of stillness, not patience, but active muscled stillness, was one of the skills that separated operators who lasted from operators who didn't. Beside him, Mitchell shifted his weight by a fraction of an inch. He knows we're here, Mitchell said barely above a breath. He knew we were here the moment we came through the eastern gap, Daniel said. He's been listening, counting, trying to figure out our positions. So he knows we have the exits covered. He suspects, he doesn't know. There's a difference and he's working the difference right now. What does that mean for us? It means he's going to do something unexpected, Daniel said. Because unexpected is the only card he has left. The radio clicked. Northern depression, Claire said, movement. Daniel's entire nervous system switched from standby to combat. In the fraction of a second it takes a synapse to fire. Confirm. Ground level approximately 1 meter south of the depression center. The vegetation is shifting, it's not wind. Wind is from the northwest at 8 miles per hour. This movement is against the wind pattern. He's coming up north, Daniel said to Mitchell. Mitchell was already signaling to the other 5 members of the northern element. The signals were small, precise, absorbed, and relayed without sound. Everyone shifted. Everyone was looking at the depression. Reynolds, do you have a firing solution on the northern depression? Affirmative, but I want to be very clear at this angle in this range, approximately 800 meters. I can see movement, but I cannot guarantee positive identification until he's fully emerged. If he comes up with a weapon in a firing position and you need immediate action, tell me. But if there is any possible non-lethal option, I am strongly recommending we take it. Understood, Daniel said. Non-lethal is the priority. We want him talking. Copy. The vegetation moved again. Then it stopped. 20 seconds of absolute stillness. He stopped, Claire said. He's listening. He's smart, Daniel thought. He's down in that tunnel listening, and he knows something has changed, and he's trying to figure out what. He's been in this business long enough to know that the most dangerous moment is emergence, the moment when you are transitioning from one environment to another, when you are neither underground nor above ground, when you are committed to movement and cannot go back without cost. He's thinking about the vehicle. He knows the vehicle didn't make it out. He knows his shooters on the ridge aren't shooting anymore. He knows his guards inside the compound are either dead or captured. He is doing the mathematics of his situation the same way Daniel Walker does the mathematics of his, and those mathematics are arriving at the same answer from different directions. The tunnel is the last option. The tunnel is the only option. But the tunnel has an exit, and the exit is a risk. And right now he is in the ground trying to calculate whether the risk of the exit is greater or smaller than the certainty of what waits if he stays underground. Mitchell, Daniel said, move 2 operators to flank positions 20 meters east and west of the depression center. I want containment before emergence. The 2 operators moved, smooth controlled, low to the ground. They reached their positions. They settled. Reynolds, once he's above ground and contained, I need you to go to observation only. No shot unless I specifically authorize or unless there's an imminent threat to my team. Understood, she said. Observation only on your call. Silent. 30 seconds. A minute. Mitchell glanced at Daniel without turning his head, a sidelong question that needed no words. Daniel gave a micro shake of his head. Wait. They wait. Then the ground moved. Not the vegetation this time. The ground itself, a 2-foot square of compressed earth lifting on a concealed hinge, the kind of hatch that takes a skilled team weeks to install and camouflages so perfectly that you could walk across it without knowing it was there. It lifted 4 inches, stopped, lifted another 4 inches, stopped again. He was listening from inside. The entire northern element of Griffin team held their positions and held their breath and did not make a sound because this was the moment and every operator knew it. And nobody needed to be told what every operator knew. The hatch opened fully. A hand appeared first, then an arm, then a head. The commander of the enemy operation that had kept 12 SEAL operators pinned for the better part of an hour, that had nearly gotten 2 of his men killed, that had masterminded an operation designed specifically to exhaust and deceive one of the most capable small units the American military had ever produced, surfaced from his tunnel and found himself looking at 6 rifles in the face of Lieutenant Daniel Walker, approximately 12 feet away. He was not what Daniel had expected. He was 50-something compact with the kind of physical economy that comes not from vanity, but from decades of living in environments where extra weight meant extra death. His face was weathered and deeply lined, and his eyes were brown and very awake. He assessed the situation in the 2 seconds it took him to fully emerge, and his assessment was visible in the way his body processed it. A slight sag controlled, immediately replaced by the straightening posture of a man deciding how he is going to conduct himself in the worst moment of his professional life. Wynn had a weapon, a pistol still holstered. His hand was near it, but not on it. Don't, Daniel said, 1 word. Flat and absolute, the way you say a word when it contains everything and you don't have time for more. The commander looked at him, then he looked at the other 5 rifles. Then he looked at the pistol at his hip with the expression of a man doing a calculation that is already finished, but whose results he doesn't want to accept. The vehicle, he said. His English was not accented like the man in the northern structure. It was nearly perfect. My vehicle, that was not your doing. He was not asking. He was placing the pieces together in real time. That was too far. Your team could not have made that shot. No, Daniel said. So there is someone else. He looked at Daniel with something that was not admiration, but was in the same neighborhood. You had a second element. I did not know about a second element. Step away from the hatch, Daniel said. Both hands visible. Do it slowly. The commander stepped away from the hatch. His hands came up slowly, the universal gesture that means I understand the situation and I am choosing not to die in it. But his eyes were still moving, still reading the terrain, still counting the men, still looking for the variable he might have missed. The second element, he said, where are they positioned? Both hands higher, Daniel said. You're not going to tell me. A pause. Professional. Weapon, Daniel said, 2 fingers left hand. Remove it and place it on the ground. The commander complied, precisely carefully with the deliberate movements of a man who understands exactly how quickly the situation can change if any movement is misread. Mitchell, Daniel said. Mitchell was already moving forward, already covering the transition, already doing the thing that 20 years of SEAL service had made as automatic as breathing. The commander was secured in 30 seconds, hands restrained behind him, weapon cleared a quick and thorough search for secondary weapons that turned up a knife in a small radio. Daniel stepped back and looked at what they had. He pressed his radio. Reynolds, primary target is secured. Repeat, primary target is in custody. What's your status? A pause. When her voice came back, it had something in it that was not quite different from her normal voice, but was different enough that Daniel noticed. I have you visual, she said. You're secure. The compound exterior is clear. A pause. All 4 exterior personnel are accounted for. Good work, he said. We'll need you to maintain overwatch until extraction assets arrive. Time estimate is approximately 25 minutes. Copy that, she said, 25 minutes. Daniel looked at the compound around him. He looked at the commander who was sitting on the ground now with his wrists secured, looking at the mountains with an expression that had settled into something Daniel could not fully read. Something between resignation and the active, quiet anger of a man who has lost and is deciding what to do with the loss. The people in the northern structure, Daniel said to him. The commander looked at him. Who are they? A pause. People who made choices that put them in a complicated position, he said. What does that mean? It means their relationship to this operation is not simple, the commander said. It means you will have many conversations with many people before you understand what they were doing here, and why they were here and who put them here. Were they voluntary? Very little in this world is completely voluntary, the commander said. You should know that. You're standing on a mountain in Colorado because someone told you to be here. Is that voluntary? Daniel looked at him for a moment. Are they safe to transport? Yes, the commander said. And there was something in his voice, just a thread of something that said this at least was a direct answer. They are not a threat to you. They are not a threat to anyone. Daniel turned away from him. He pressed his radio. Tanner webbed the 4 individuals in the northern structure. Begin medical assessment and prepare for transport. Treat the woman's arm wound. Command is going to want to talk to all 4 individually, but for now they are non-hostile and they are under our protection. Understood. Copy, Tanner said. And then after a half second, they're okay, Lieutenant. A little rough, but they're okay. The older man keeps asking about you, says he has information. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. He walked the compound perimeter. Not tactically, he walked it the way you walk something after an operation has resolved, the walking of a man taking inventory of what happened and what it cost and what it meant. He stopped at the eastern gap. He looked at the narrow space between the barrier panels. He thought about a woman in the fog who had spent 4 days alone in the Colorado mountains mapping a gap in a wall that she didn't know anyone would need. He pressed the radio. Reynolds. Here. The gap in the eastern wall, he said. Day 3. Day 3, she said. I almost didn't log it. It seemed too small to matter. But my protocol is, if you see it, you write it down. You don't decide what matters in the field. You decide what matters in the analysis. The field gives you everything. Analysis sorts it. Where did that come from? A pause. My first instructor, she said. Day 1 of reconnaissance training. He said the field never lies to you. Your interpretation lies to you. Write down what you see, not what you think it means. What you think it means changes. What you saw doesn't. Daniel Walker stood at the eastern gap and looked at the mountains and thought about information and patience and 4 days of a person writing down everything they saw so that when the moment arrived when 12 men were pinned on a ridge and a mission was disintegrating and a man was climbing into a vehicle to disappear, everything that had been written down was ready. Reynolds, he said, yes. Extraction is 20 minutes out. When the helicopters arrive, I want you transported with the primary element, not secondary. Primary. A brief pause. I'm attached to the Ranger support element, she said. My after-action reporting goes through a different chain. I'm aware, he said. I'm requesting you travel with the primary element anyway. My after-action is going to need corroboration on several points, and you're the most qualified person to provide it. Another pause. Is that the reason, she said? He looked at the mountains. It's a reason, he said. He heard something in the radio that might have been a sound, might have been static, might have been the kind of thing that happens when a person who has been alone in a mountain for 4 days and has spent the last 2 hours being the most important person on a battlefield that nobody knew she was part of, makes a sound that she didn't intend to make and immediately controls. Copy that, she said. Primary element. Understood. 17 minutes later, Daniel Walker was standing at the edge of a landing zone marked by infrared strobes when the fog shifted for the 4th time, and a figure walked out of it carrying a rifle and a pack that had been on her back for 4 days and a notebook full of everything the mountains had told her. She walked the way she always walked, with the specific economy of someone who has exactly as much energy as the situation requires and wastes none of it. Her face was the same as it had been 2 hours ago, weathered, calm, and completely awake. But something was different. He couldn't identify it until she was standing beside him, watching the horizon where the helicopter sound was growing. Then he understood. She was tired. Not the deep structural exhaustion that breaks people. The other kind. The kind that comes after a very long, sustained effort reaches its natural conclusion, and the body releases what it has been holding because the holding is over. She was tired, and she was letting herself be tired, and that was different from how she had been for the last 2 hours, because for the last 2 hours there had been no space for it. You all right, he said. She considered the question with the same seriousness she brought to everything. Yes, said. I'll be better with a meal and a bed, in that order. I'll see what I can do, he said. The helicopter came over the ridge, and the sound of the rotors erased everything else. And in the noise and the wind and the organized movement of a team preparing to board, Daniel Walker looked at the woman who had walked out of the Colorado fog with a rifle and 4 days of information and a probability estimate of 78%, and felt something that was not quite gratitude and not quite admiration, and was probably, if he was being honest, some combination of both those things and one thing more. Something that he would spend the next several weeks trying to find the right word for, and would eventually, sitting in a debriefing room in Virginia, describe to a colonel in a uniform full of ribbons, as follows: the specific feeling you get when you realize that the most important person on a battlefield was someone you didn't know existed until they walked out of a cloud. I didn't know yet what would come next, what the commander would say in interrogation, what the 4 people in the northern structure would reveal, what the documentation in room 2 of the main structure would tell the analysts who would spend the next months working through it. He didn't know any of that yet. What he knew, standing on a Colorado mountain in the October cold, with a helicopter coming in and 12 men behind him who were alive when they shouldn't have been, was that the mission had worked, and he knew why. And knowing why made the how feel important in a way that most operations didn't. Most operations worked because of planning and training and the professional competence of people who had dedicated their lives to being excellent at something difficult. This operation had all of that, but it also had 4 days of silence. 4 days of watching and waiting and writing things down in a waterproof notebook in the cold. 4 days of a person being completely alone with the mountains and the problem and the patience to let the answer reveal itself. The helicopter touched down, and Staff Sergeant Claire Reynolds, who had spent 4 days preparing for a 2-hour operation that nobody would ever fully see, picked up her pack and her rifle and walked toward it without looking back. The helicopter ride took 31 minutes. Nobody talked. That was not unusual. After operations teams were often quiet, not from trauma, not from shock, but from the specific decompression that happens when the body's emergency systems begin standing down and the mind starts catching up on everything it filed away during the period when there was no time to process anything. The noise of the rotors made conversation difficult anyway, which was convenient because most of what needed to be said didn't have words yet. Daniel sat across from the commander, who was secured and flanked and looking at the floor with the expression of a man conducting an internal inventory. Not of regret, Daniel had seen enough of these men to recognize that regret was rarely part of the inventory. He was cataloging, assessing what had been lost, what might still be salvaged, what information he held that had value and in what sequence it should be offered to maximize his position. He was already working his next move. Daniel watched him work it and said nothing. Claire was at the far end of the cabin, her back against the hull, her rifle between her knees, her pack on her lap. Her eyes were closed. Not sleeping, he could tell by the quality of her stillness that she was not sleeping. She was doing what she always seemed to be doing, which was processing. Taking in information, running it through whatever internal system she used to convert raw observation into organized understanding. Tanner was beside Daniel, left hand wrapped around the cargo strap above him, right hand resting in his lap. The cut above his eye had been cleaned and closed with a butterfly strip by one of the team's medics during the compound clearance. He looked like a man who had been in a minor car accident and found the whole thing slightly embarrassing. He caught Daniel watching him and gave a small shrug that said, "I'm fine, sir, I promise. Can we please move on?" Daniel looked at Mitchell. Mitchell was looking at Claire, not with the calculating assessment of a team leader evaluating a new asset, with something more elemental. The look of a man who has been doing a thing for a very long time and has just encountered someone who does a version of that thing that he cannot fully account for. It was the look of professional recalibration. Daniel had seen Mitchell in combat for 4 years. He had never once seen Mitchell look at another operator the way he was looking at Claire Reynolds right now. The helicopter banked west. Below them, the Colorado Rockies, enormous and different, holding the morning's events with the same composure they held every event that had ever happened in their shadow. From above, the ridgeline looked benign. The compound was invisible, folded into terrain that from this altitude appeared entirely uninhabited. Daniel thought about the gap in the eastern wall. He thought about the waterproof notebook. He thought about 4 days. He thought about 78%. The helicopter touched down at a forward operating base that had been established in a valley 40 miles from the operational area. The facility was temporary, a collection of prefabricated structures, vehicles, communication equipment, and the specific organized density of a military installation that knows it will be somewhere else in 6 weeks. The landing pad was marked "Personnel were waiting," and the organized efficiency of a mission conclusion began immediately. The commander was taken by a separate security element. The team was directed to a briefing area. The 4 individuals from the northern structure were escorted to a medical tent. Daniel watched the older man from the northern structure walk past him toward the medical tent. The man was moving stiffly, time in restraints, dehydration, the accumulated physical cost of however long he'd been in that room. But he walked with the kind of deliberate dignity that some people maintain even when everything external has been stripped away. He caught Daniel's eye as he passed. "You are Walker," the man said. Daniel stopped. "Yes. My name is Dr. Hamid Nasser." He said it the way people say things they've had to repeat in difficult circumstances and have learned to say clearly. "I was a communications consultant. I came to this facility under an arrangement I was told was voluntary." A pause. "It was not voluntary." "We'll talk," Daniel said, "after you've been seen by medical." "I want to talk now," Nasser said. Not demanding the opposite of demanding, asking, but with the specific urgency of someone who has held information for a long time in a place where holding it was dangerous and needs to transfer that weight to someone capable of using it. Daniel looked at the medical personnel waiting, looked back at Nasir. 10 minutes, Daniel said, after they clear you. Nasir nodded. He walked on. Something about his posture changed minimally as he walked away, something released that had been held. Daniel filed it and turned toward the briefing structure. Claire was beside him. He wasn't sure exactly when she had appeared there. She had a quality of movement that made her arrivals feel like she had simply always been in a place and he was only now noticing it. "The man," she said, "the older one. Dr. Nasir, did you observe him during your 4 days?" "He's one of the 3 I logged on day 1, she said, "the ones whose body language didn't fit the profile of the other personnel. He's the one I was most uncertain about. He moved like someone who was cooperating because cooperation was the least terrible option available, not because he agreed with what was happening. Your impression of his information?" "I don't know what he knows," she said, But he's been watching that compound operation from the inside for however long he's been there. Whatever he observed carefully. He's that kind of person. You can tell that from 4 days of distant observation. You can tell a lot about how people think by watching how they move when nobody's asking them to perform, she said. When someone is just existing, eating, walking, waiting, that's when you see what they're actually like. Daniel looked at her. Is that how you assessed us? He said. When you were watching the operation from the ridge before you came out? She considered that. I watched your team for 22 minutes before I made the decision to approach, she said. Yes, I was reading everything I could. And what did you conclude? That you were good, she said simply. That you were in a situation that wasn't your fault and that was going to get worse without intervention. And that you were the kind of team that would use an asset correctly rather than misuse it or ignore it. How did you assess the last part, whether we'd use you correctly? Your team leader, she said, you. The way you moved when you were stationary, not fidgeting, not showing frustration. Controlled. And when you communicated with your men, you used their call signs and their roles, not their names. That means you were operating in task mode, not relationship mode. Task mode means you evaluate assets on capability, not familiarity. That's what I needed. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You decided all of that in 22 minutes. 19 actually, she said. The last 3 minutes I was moving toward your position. They reached the briefing structure entrance. A Colonel Daniel didn't recognize was already waiting. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, wearing the expression of a man who has read a preliminary report and has several hundred questions that the report has not answered. Lieutenant Walker, the colonel said. Colonel Thomas Bennett, Task Force Commander. He looked at Claire with the specific assessment of a senior officer encountering an unfamiliar asset in an operational context. Staff Sergeant Reynolds. Sir, Claire said, I understand from the preliminary report that your contribution to this operation was significant. I did my job, she said. Bennett looked at her for a moment longer than the exchange required. Then he looked at Daniel. I want full debrief in 30 minutes. Both of you together, then separately. There's a lot I need to understand about how this morning went the way it went. Copy, sir, Daniel said. I have a brief conversation requested with Dr. Nasser before the debrief. 10 minutes. Bennett's expression shifted. Nasir, yes. The medical team has a preliminary read on him. He's stable. His information? Bennett paused and something moved behind his eyes that told Daniel the preliminary information was not simple. His information is going to require careful handling. Proceed with your conversation. 10 minutes. He walked away. Daniel watched him go. The colonel walked with the weight of someone who had already received information that was reorganizing his understanding of what this morning actually was. That weight was communicable. Daniel felt it transfer partially to him as he watched it. He looked at Claire. Wait here. She sat on a bench outside the medical tent. Without being asked twice, unslung her pack and set it beside her. She pulled out the waterproof notebook and opened it, not to review her notes, Daniel thought, but from the same instinct that makes certain people always have their hands occupied with something purposeful. She began writing in it. He watched her for just a moment, then he went inside. Nasser was seated on a medical cot, a bandage being applied to his right forearm, his left hand wrapped around a water bottle that he was drinking from, with the focused attention of someone managing extreme thirst. Carefully small sips, not gulps, because he knew the consequences of drinking too fast on a depleted system, and he was managing even his own relief with precision. The woman in the group, Nasir's colleague or subordinate, Daniel wasn't sure yet, was on the adjacent cot. Her arm wound was being cleaned. She was looking at the medical personnel with an expression of muted astonishment, the look of someone experiencing professional medical care after an extended period of something significantly less. "Dur Nasir," Daniel said. Nasir looked up. He set down the water bottle with visible reluctance. "Lieutenant Walker." Daniel pulled a folding chair, set it in front of the cot sat. He didn't take out a notebook. He didn't prepare a recording device. He just looked at Nasir and waited. Nasir understood the posture immediately. He straightened. "What I tell you will complicate things," he said. "I want you to understand that before I tell you. I'm not trying to create problems. I'm trying to give you accurate information, and accurate information about this situation is complicated." "Tell me," Daniel said. Nasser took a breath. "The man you captured this morning, the commander. He is not the top of this structure. High as a facilitation node. He moves things, people, information. He receives instructions and executes. But the instructions come from somewhere else. A pause. I came here because I was contracted for a communications infrastructure project. I was told it was commercial work for a private telecommunications company. By the time I understood what the infrastructure was actually supporting, here's one name. He searched for the word, committed, in the sense that people who know you've seen something used to describe a situation where leaving is not survivable. What was the infrastructure supporting, Daniel said. Nasser looked at him. A communication network that is not on any government or commercial registry I have ever seen. Encrypted, distributed, hardened against electronic surveillance. It passes signals in a pattern that makes origin identification essentially impossible. He paused. I have been building it for 11 months. The room was quiet except for medical sounds. Daniel kept his expression neutral through the practice of many years. 11 months, he said. Yes. Is it operational? Parts of it, Nasser said. Not all. He stopped. Something moved across his face. I made certain decisions about the installation sequence. Certain components that were requested have not been installed. Other components were installed in configurations that introduced specific vulnerabilities that I chose not to disclose. Daniel looked at him. You sabotaged it, he said. I introduced structural inefficiencies that a sufficiently skilled technical team could identify and exploit, Nasser said carefully. I did not do this because I am brave. I did it because I understood what the network was for, and I could not finish building a thing like that and remain the person I understood myself to be. There was a quality to the silence after he said this that Daniel Walker had encountered very rarely in his professional life. The silence of a confession that is not seeking absolution, but simply needs to be transferred, moved from the place where it has been held in isolation to a place where someone else can carry part of the weight. The documentation in the compound's main structure, Daniel said. Room 2, communications equipment maps. System documentation, Nasser said. Architecture diagrams. Installation records. If your technical analysts receive those materials with an understanding of what they're looking at, they will find a network that is almost operational. Almost. And they will find, if they look carefully at the right points in the architecture, the vulnerabilities I built in. We have the materials, Daniel said. Nasser closed his eyes. Then what I came here for is done, he said quietly. Daniel stood. Dr. Nasser, the debrief team is going to need everything you just told me in detail. Your cooperation will be valued and will be considered. I know, Nasser said. I've been waiting a long time to cooperate with the right people. He opened his eyes. The person who stopped the vehicle this morning, the shot from distance, that was not from your team. No, Daniel said. There is someone else who does not appear in any briefing document I have encountered in 11 months, Nasser said. I observed the vehicle from the window of the northern structure. The shot came before your team arrived at the compound. I do not know how someone could make a shot like that from sufficient distance to have not been detected during all the time I was observing this compound's surrounding. He paused. Whoever that person is, I want you to know that I believe they saved my life. If that vehicle had left, I would have been moved as well, in a less comfortable situation than I was already in. Daniel looked at him for a moment. I'll pass that along, he said. He left the medical tent. Claire was still on the bench outside, still writing in the notebook. The same focused economy of motion she applied to everything. She didn't look up when he came out because she had heard his footsteps and already knew it was him. He sat beside her. Your shot at the vehicle, he said, the 2,600-meter shot. There was a man in that northern structure watching it happen. She stopped writing. I know, I had him visual for the last hour before the vehicle started. I couldn't tell if he was willing or unwilling, so I logged him as uncertain and held that in my threat assessment without resolving it. He was unwilling, Daniel said. He's been there 11 months. He built a communications network he didn't want to build and then spent 11 months quietly breaking what he built. Claire was quiet for a moment. 11 months, she said. Alone, Daniel said, in a compound, pretending to cooperate, with no contact with anyone who knew what he was actually doing. He looked at her profile. You spent 4 days alone in those mountains. She understood what he was saying without him completing it. It's not the same thing, she said. No, he agreed, but you understand it. She put her pen in her notebook and closed it. Yes, she said, I understand it. They sat for a moment in the thin mountain air. Around them, the base moved at its operational tempo, personnel, moving with purpose, vehicles, repositioning the communication equipment, cycling through its functions. The sun was higher now. The fog had burned off. Somewhere over the ridge, 4 days of a woman's silent work had become a morning of a mission that would take months to fully understand. Reynolds, Daniel said. Walker, she said. The debrief is in 20 minutes. Bennett is going to ask you to walk through every engagement in order. He's going to have questions about the vehicle shot, specifically range, verification, environmental conditions, calculation, methodology. He's going to ask you to justify the 2,600-meter decision on evidentiary grounds. That's appropriate, she said. He might also question the decision to remain undetected from your assigned element for 4 days without communication. She looked at him. My mission parameters allowed for communication blackout during active observation phases. I know. He knows. He'll still ask. And I'll still answer. I know you will, he said. He paused. I want you to know something before you go in there, before the formal process starts and everything becomes documentation and recorded statements in official language. He looked at the mountains. What you did this morning, what you built over 4 days and deployed in 2 hours, I have been in the SEAL teams for 9 years. I have operated with some of the most capable people in the American military. And what you did this morning, he stopped, restarted. The 12 men on my team are alive and intact, and we have a target in custody in a communications network we wouldn't have known existed for God knows how long. All of that is because of 4 days that nobody saw and 2 hours that nobody will fully understand from the reports. He turned to look at her. I want to say that directly, before the reports. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said. It was not a deflection and it was not false modesty. She received it the way she received everything directly, without unnecessary processing. And then she said, the 12 of you made it possible. You held position under fire without returning fire, which goes against everything your training tells you to do. You trusted a calculation made by someone you'd never met. She paused. That's a hard thing, trusting an unknown quantity with your team's lives. I want you to know I understood that. I understood what I was asking when I told you to hold. I did it because you gave me 78%, he said. Not 90, she said. Not 90 points, he confirmed. 90 would have told me you were selling something. 78 told me you were counting. She almost smiled. It was the closest to a full smile he'd seen from her. A real one, not the controlled expression she used when something was professionally appropriate to acknowledge. Something genuine that she didn't entirely suppress. We should go in, she said. Yeah. They stood. They walked toward the briefing structure. Mitchell was outside it, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching them approach. He looked at Daniel with the expression that meant he had been thinking about something for a while and had arrived at a conclusion. Debrief, Daniel said. 2 minutes, Mitchell said. He looked at Claire. Staff Sergeant, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm asking because I genuinely want to know, not because I'm testing you or questioning anything. She turned to him. Ask. The first shot, 2,100 meters fog mountain conditions. When you pulled the trigger, and I mean the actual moment, not the calculation, not the setup, were you certain? She looked at him steadily. No, she said. Mitchell absorbed this, but you fired. Certainty isn't the standard, she said. Certainty is a luxury. The standard is whether your best possible assessment, given everything you have and everything you know, supports taking the action. Mine did. She paused. I was not certain. I was committed. Those are different things. Mitchell uncrossed his arms. He looked at Daniel. He looked back at Claire. Yeah, he said, okay. He said it the way a person says something when they've received an answer that is better than the answer they expected, and they need a moment to integrate it. He held the door open. They went inside. The debrief took 4 hours. Bennett ran it with the systematic thoroughness of a man who understood that the information generated by this morning's operation had implications that extended well beyond the operation itself. He recorded everything. He asked same questions multiple times in different orders, not because he doubted the answers, but because he knew from experience that multiple passes through the same information from different angles reveals things that linear accounting misses. The vehicle shot took 40 minutes of the debrief alone. Bennett had a technical analyst in the room, a quiet young man with the look of someone who spent more time with ballistic equations than with people who walk through Claire's methodology in detail. One readings temperature differentials, elevation calculations. The ballistic arc of a projectile traveling 2,640 meters through variable air conditions at a high altitude. The analyst asked his questions in the careful language of someone who respected what he was examining. When it was done, the analyst looked at Bennett and said simply, "The methodology is sound, the calculation is defensible. The environmental conditions as described are consistent with the outcome." Bennett made a note. Then he looked at Claire. "What I'm going to tell you is not for the report," he said, "and the report will reflect the operation as documented. What I'm telling you personally as the task force commander is that I have reviewed more after-action reports from more special operations missions than I care to count. And the body of work you produced over 4 days alone, without support, and the way you applied that work this morning, it is genuinely extraordinary. I want to say that directly before this becomes paperwork." Claire received this the same way she had received Daniel's acknowledgement outside directly without deflection or performance. "I had 4 days to prepare," she said. "Most of the difficulty had already been resolved before the shooting started. The preparation is the job. The shooting is just when the preparation becomes visible." "The preparation is the job," Bennett repeated. He wrote that down, not for the report, for himself. The debrief continued. Dr. Nasir's information, the communications network, the 11 months of quiet sabotage, the documentation from room 2 of the main structure, which the technical team had already begun processing, and which within the first 2 hours had produced 3 separate pieces of information that sent 3 separate notification chains up 3 separate organizational hierarchies. The morning that had started as a classified counterterrorism operation had become by early afternoon the entry point to something significantly larger. Daniel felt this expand around him, the way operational scope always expands, not all at once, but in increments, each new piece of information adding a dimension that wasn't previously visible. He sat in the debrief and felt the shape of what they'd found this morning grow from a single operation into something whose edges he couldn't yet see. At hour 3 of the debrief, Bennett paused the formal session to take a communication from the intelligence side of the task force. He stepped out of the room. He was gone 8 minutes. When he came back, his face had changed in a way that was not dramatic, but was definite. The face of a man who has received information that moves the magnitude of a situation up by a measurable degree. He sat down. "The communications network that Dr. Nasir described," he said, "our technical team has confirmed its existence using the documentation from the compound. Preliminary assessment suggests it covers—" He paused, and the pause was the kind that precedes large numbers. 11 states, 17 nodes. Traffic analysis suggests it has been active at partial functionality for approximately 8 months. The room was quiet. 8 months, Daniel said. "The vulnerabilities Dr. Nasir introduced are exactly where he said they would be," Bennett continued. "Our technical team's preliminary read is that if we can access those vulnerabilities correctly, we have the potential to trace traffic patterns back to origin points for the past 8 months of partial operation. 8 months of a network, 17 nodes, 11 states, and a man named Nasir who had spent 11 months building it incorrectly on purpose, waiting for someone to come in and understand why." Daniel looked at the table. He looked at Claire. She was looking at Bennett with the focused, assessing attention she brought to every piece of information, not reacting, just receiving and processing. "The operation this morning," Daniel said to Bennett, "it wasn't the end of something." "No," Bennett said, "it was the beginning of something." He looked at both of them, "which is why I need to talk to both of you about what happens next." The next part of the conversation took 45 minutes and involved clearance levels and operational parameters and resource allocations that Daniel Walker had not anticipated discussing when he woke up before dawn and flew to a Colorado ridgeline. It involved decisions being made at levels above Bennett's pay grade, communicated through Bennett about what the morning's catch had opened up and how to proceed through the door that had unexpectedly been created. When it was over, Daniel sat alone in the briefing room for a few minutes after everyone else had stepped out. He sat with the accumulated weight of the day, the ridge, the funk, the shots, the compound, the tunnel, the commander's face when he surfaced and found himself surrounded. The older man's voice saying, "I came here under an arrangement I was told was voluntary." Then the door opened and Claire was there. "You look like a man recalculating," she said. "I am," he said. She came in and sat across from him. Her rifle was on her back. Her pack was on her shoulder. She had the look of someone who is preparing to transition, ready to move, organized for departure, present for one more conversation before the next thing starts. "The network," he said. 11 states, 17 nodes, 8 months of operation. "We went in this morning to capture one commander. We came out with the front door to something much bigger." "Yes," she said. "Does that change anything for you?" he said. "What you did this morning, knowing it's the entry point to something larger." She thought about it genuinely. "No," she said. "The shots I took are the same shots regardless of what they opened up. The 4 days of preparation are the same 4 days. The calculation doesn't change retroactively because the stakes turn out to be higher than we knew. Doesn't it make it feel more significant?" "It always felt significant," she said. "Your 12 men were always significant. Dr. Nasser was always significant. The calculation was always serious." She looked at him. "I don't need the stakes to be large to take the work seriously. The work is serious at any scale. That's the only way to do it." Daniel looked at her across the table. "Bennett is going to request your involvement in the follow-on operations," he said. "I want you to know that's coming before it arrives officially." "I assume," she said. "How do you feel about it?" She was quiet for a moment, a genuine considering quiet. "Ask me that again after I've slept," she said. He almost laughed. It came out as something quieter, an exhale that had amusement in it, the compressed laugh of a very tired man who has found something genuinely unexpectedly funny in the middle of an extremely serious day. "Fair enough," he said. She stood. He stood. They walked out of the briefing room together into the organized activity of the forward operating base, into the thin mountain air, in the October light that had been fighting through clouds all morning and had finally somewhere around noon won. And in the interrogation room, 3 structures away, the captured commander was sitting across a table from 2 intelligence officers and saying nothing or almost nothing. Because he was smart, and smart people understand the value of information, and he was doing his own calculation. But what he didn't know and couldn't know was that Dr. Nasir had already given them the architecture, already handed them the blueprint for the thing 11 months of his intelligence had protected, already told them where the vulnerabilities were and what they were shaped like, and how a sufficiently skilled technical team could reach through them and begin to unravel 8 months of encrypted communication traffic. The commander could say nothing or he could say everything, and by now it barely mattered. And the door had been opened from the inside, by a man who spent 11 months pretending to build a wall, while quietly, carefully, at a cost he would carry for the rest of his life, building a key. Daniel Walker walked out into the afternoon and looked at the mountains and thought about the different forms that extraordinary things take. The shot at 2,600 meters, the 4 days of silent observation, the 11 months of calculated sabotage. All of them had looked from the outside like nothing, until the moment they became everything. 3 weeks after the Colorado operation, Daniel Walker sat in a conference room on the 4th floor of a building in Arlington, Virginia, that had no visible signage on its exterior, and whose address did not appear in any public directory. The room smelled like recycled air and old coffee, and the specific institutional neutrality of spaces designed to contain sensitive conversations without absorbing them. Across the table from him sat Colonel Bennett, 2 intelligence analysts whose names he had been given once, and would not be repeated, a Department of Justice attorney who had the look of someone who had not slept well in 3 weeks, and a woman from a federal agency that coordinated between military and civilian law enforcement on matters that did not fit cleanly into either jurisdiction. The table between them held 6 separate reports, each flagged with classification markers, each representing a thread pulled from the documentation recovered from the compound's main structure, Room 2, the room Daniel had cleared and left to the technical teams, while his team was still securing the compound perimeter. 6 threads, 6 separate investigations now running simultaneously across 4 agencies. The communications network that Dr. Nasir had spent 11 months building and quietly breaking had turned out to be the connective infrastructure of an operation whose scope had, in the 3 weeks since the Colorado mission, expanded every time the technical team successfully traced another node. 17 nodes had become 22. 11 states had become 14. 8 months of traffic analysis had produced names, locations, financial transfers, and a communication pattern whose implications the DOJ attorney was still working to fully articulate in language that a federal judge would accept as a warrant foundation. The network. The intelligence analyst on the left said a woman named Torres, who communicated in the precise, compressed syntax of someone who has spent years translating operational complexity into briefable summaries, is functional in ways we did not initially assess. The vulnerabilities Dr. Nasir introduced are real and they are exploitable. But we have discovered in the past 72 hours that the network also has a secondary architecture that Nasir was not aware of. A layer built in after his installation work by someone with a different skill set. Daniel looked at her. What does that mean operationally? It means that someone else knew the primary architecture had vulnerabilities, she said, and built a redundant system around it, which means either they suspected Nasir's cooperation or they were simply thorough enough to assume that any architecture could be compromised and planned accordingly. Which is it? Torres looked at the analyst beside her, whose name Daniel had been given as Reeves. Reeves was younger, quieter, and had the specific quality of someone who has been awake for a very long time and is managing it through the application of disciplined focus. We don't know yet, Reeves said. The secondary architecture is more sophisticated than the primary. It will take additional time to map. Bennett was looking at Daniel with an expression that said, "This is the part where I need you to understand something I'm about to say without fully saying it." The follow-on operation that we discussed at the FOB, Bennett said, the parameters have expanded. How much? Daniel said. Significantly, Bennett said. The DOJ attorney shifted in her chair. The legal framework is complex, she said, which was attorney language for. We are in territory where existing frameworks don't cleanly apply, and we are building new ones in real time. Daniel looked at the 6 reports on the table. He thought about a man named Nasir sitting in a room right now somewhere in this building or a building very much like it, answering questions in the careful, precise way he answered everything, delivering 11 months of accumulated observation to people who were equipped to use it. He thought about the weight of that, the 11 months of pretending, the 11 months of building something wrong and hoping that the wrongness would eventually reach someone who understood why. I thought about the secondary architecture. Someone who knew the primary had been compromised. Someone who had planned for it. Bennett, Daniel said, the secondary layer. If someone built it because they suspected Nasir's cooperation, that means they had information about Nasir, about his loyalties. Yes, Bennett said, which means there's a source of information about Nasir that we haven't identified. Yes, Bennett said, which means the network has access to information about people who are cooperating against it. The room was quiet. That's the part, Torres said carefully, that the past 72 hours have made us most concerned about. Daniel sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He did the calculation that the room was asking him to do the calculation. He could see in every face around the table the calculation that said the Colorado operation had not closed a chapter, but had turned a page, and what was on the next page was significantly more complex and significantly more dangerous than what had been on the page before. He thought about Claire. He had not seen her since Arlington. Since the debrief at the FOB, she had been processed through her own after-action chain, the Ranger support element, her own commanding structure, the separate reporting requirements of a long-range reconnaissance specialist whose 4-day independent mission had produced outcomes that nobody in her chain of command had anticipated when they inserted her into the Colorado mountains by helicopter. He had heard through Mitchell that her debrief on the Ranger side had taken 2 days, that the 2,600-meter shot had generated significant interest from people whose professional interest in long-range precision shooting was institutional rather than operational, that there had been a conversation somewhere above Claire's pay grade about what the shot represented technically and what it suggested about the capability of the person who made it. He had heard that Claire had answered every question directly and without embellishment and had declined on 3 separate occasions to characterize what she had done as exceptional. That sounded right. Walker, Bennett said, I'm here. The follow-on operation. I need to know if Griffin team is available. Griffin team is always available, Daniel said. What's the target? The secondary architecture's central node, Bennett said. Our technical team has narrowed the location to a facility in the Pacific Northwest, rural, minimal surrounding population. The facility itself is, he paused, defended in ways that suggest whoever operates it has a detailed understanding of how SEAL teams approach defended facilities. Daniel looked at him. They've been studying us, Daniel said. They've been studying multiple special operations profiles, Torres said. What we found in the traffic analysis from the primary network is evidence of a sustained intelligence gathering effort focused on U.S. special operations methodology. Approach patterns, communication protocols, team, structure, response timelines. She paused. They have been preparing for the possibility of exactly what happened in Colorado. Which means Colorado told them something, Daniel said. Colorado told them their primary network was compromised, Reeves said. They don't know how, they don't know the full extent. But the traffic on the secondary architecture changed pattern approximately 6 hours after the Colorado operation concluded. The pattern change indicates accelerated activity. He looked at Daniel. They're moving. Whatever the secondary network's operational purpose is, they are accelerating toward it. Daniel looked at Bennett. Timeline, he said. We don't know, Bennett said. That's the honest answer. The traffic analysis can tell us that activity has increased. It cannot tell us what the activity is building toward or when it reaches its intended conclusion. He paused. Which means we are working against a timeline we cannot see. In the Pacific Northwest facility is the best lead we have to the answer, Bennett said. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the Colorado Ridge. He thought about 12 men pinned under fire from positions they couldn't locate. He thought about walking out of that operation with a target in custody and 12 men intact in a communications network whose existence they hadn't known about before that morning. I thought about what it would mean to go into a facility defended by people who had spent significant time studying how facilities get taken by people like Daniel Walker. I want Reynolds, he said. The room shifted, not dramatically, just the subtle collective adjustment of a group of people encountering a statement that reorganizes their mental picture of what the conversation is about. Bennett looked at him. She's Ranger support element, her assignment parameters. I'm aware of her assignment parameters, Daniel said. I'm requesting her attachment to Griffin team for the Pacific Northwest operation on the basis of demonstrated operational compatibility and unique capability. She spent 4 days alone in Colorado building intelligence that we could not have obtained any other way. The Pacific Northwest facility is defended by people who have studied our approach patterns. I want someone who builds intelligence in a way that is outside any known approach pattern because she doesn't have an approach pattern. She has a methodology, and it doesn't look like anything they've been studying. Bennett looked at Torres. Torres made a note. Reeves was already typing something. The DOJ attorney had no opinion on this and showed it through silence. I'll make the request, Bennett said. I cannot guarantee the outcome. Her chain of command has its own equities. I understand, Daniel said. Make the request. He drove back to the base with the 6 reports in a secured case on the passenger seat and the secondary architecture in the back of his mind. The version of the network that someone had built after Nasir's version, built around the vulnerabilities that Nasir had introduced, built by someone who understood that the first version might fail and planned accordingly. The intelligence suggested patience of a different quality than what he'd encountered before. Most adversaries were patient in the reactive sense, patient when forced to be patient when the alternative was immediate failure. This was different. This was the patience of someone who had anticipated compromise and built redundancy around it before the compromise happened. The patience of someone who assumed that everything they built might eventually be found and planned the next layer before the current layer was even complete. He understood, driving through Virginia traffic, why the room had been quiet when Torres said the word concerned. 48 hours later, he got the call from Bennett. Reynolds is confirmed, Bennett said. Attachment approved effective immediately. She'll report to Griffin team staging in 72 hours. Daniel felt something move through him that he didn't immediately classify. Something that was partially operational. The satisfaction of having the right asset for the right situation, and partially something else that he was not going to examine closely in the parking lot of a base commissary while talking on a secure phone. Understood, he said. We'll be ready. He called Mitchell. Mitchell answered on the second ring. Did we get her? We got her. A pause. Good, Mitchell said. And the word contained everything that Mitchell had not said in the 3 weeks since Colorado, but had communicated in the way he talked about the operation every time it came up, which was every time someone asked Mitchell about a long shot, or about patience, or about the difference between confidence and certainty. 72 hours, Daniel said. Start staging. When Claire walked into the Griffin team briefing room 72 hours later, the first thing Daniel noticed was that she had the same pack, the same rifle, the same waterproof notebook worn at the corners now, in a way that suggested it had been written in extensively since the last time he'd seen it. The second thing he noticed was that she had slept. Not fully. Nobody in their line of work ever slept fully because the part of the brain that processed threat never completely stood down, but enough. The exhaustion that had been visible in her face at the Colorado phobie, that honest bone-deep tiredness of 4 days and 2 hours of sustained operation, was gone. What remained was the alertness he recognized from the moment she had walked out of the fog on the mountain ridge. She sat down across from him and looked at the briefing materials he'd laid out on the table. Pacific Northwest, she said, reading the geographic summary. Rural facility, defended perimeter. She looked up. You said they've been studying SEAL team approach patterns. Yes. So they know what to expect from a conventional assault. From any conventional assault profile we have documented evidence of. She nodded slowly, which means a conventional assault profile is exactly what they'll be prepared for. Yes. And what they won't be prepared for, she said, is 4 days of observation from a position so far outside their defensive perimeter that it doesn't register as a threat vector. That's the theory, he said. It's not a theory, she said. It's what I did in Colorado. The geometry is different. The principle is the same. She looked at the terrain maps. What's the observation window before the operation needs to execute? Bennett is giving us as much time as the traffic analysis allows. Right now, unknown. Could be a week. Could be less. I need to be inserted as early as possible, she said. Every day of observation is information I don't have to manufacture under pressure. You'll be inserted tomorrow morning, he said. Independent insertions separate from the team. She looked at him. Alone again. Unless you want company. She considered this with genuine seriousness. No, she said after a moment. Company changes the observation. 2 people make twice the noise, twice the sign, twice the variables. 1 person disappears, 2 people hide. She looked at the maps. I'll go alone. Tanner appeared in the doorway of the briefing room and saw Claire, and gave the small acknowledging nod of a man who does not make a production of recognizing someone, but wants them to know they have been recognized. Staff Sergeant, he said. Petty officer, she said. How's the eye? He touched the faint mark above his eyebrow where the butterfly strip had been. Completely fine, he said, which I said at the time. You did, she agreed. Are we doing this again, he asked, looking at the briefing materials with the enthusiasm of a man who had made his peace with the possibility of being shot at in mountains and had decided that enthusiasm was the appropriate response. We're doing this again, Daniel said. Tanner looked at Claire. Do you know what we're up against? Not yet, she said. That's what the next 4 days are for. He nodded like this made complete sense. It made complete sense because it did. He had watched her work in Colorado. He had seen what 4 days of patience produced. He was not a man who needed to be shown the same thing twice. He left. Daniel looked at Claire. There's something I need to tell you before tomorrow, he said. She waited. The secondary architecture, the layer they built after Nasir's version. The intelligence suggests they have information about people cooperating against the network. We don't know how. We don't know the source. But it's possible that your involvement in Colorado is known at some level. Something moved across her face, not fear. Something more considered than fear. The expression of a person integrating a new variable into an existing calculation and adjusting accordingly. If they know about Colorado, she said, they know someone made the vehicle shot. Yes. They don't know who. We believe not, but the capability set is distinctive, she said. And they have been studying U.S. military capability sets. Yes, she was quiet for a moment. Then, does this change the insertion plan? It changes the risk assessment, he said. It doesn't necessarily change the insertion plan. That's your call. She looked at the terrain maps for a long moment, long enough that Daniel started to form a sentence that he didn't finish because she spoke before he completed it. It doesn't change the plan, she said. If anything, it makes the observation more important. If they know a long-range capability was deployed in Colorado and they're preparing for it, I need to know what preparations they've made before anyone else goes near that facility. She looked at him directly. Send me in early. Tomorrow as planned. The more time I have, the better the picture. Claire, I know what you're going to say, she said. Do you? You're going to say that the risk is elevated because of the possibility of compromise, and that elevated risk requires a different framework, and that the responsible thing is to consider whether independent insertion is still the right call. Yes, he said. And I'm telling you that the responsible thing is exactly what I just said it is. Independent insertion, early maximum observation time. The risk doesn't go down by changing the plan. It goes down by having the best possible information about what we're walking into. She paused. 4 days in Colorado gave you enough information to capture a target and uncover a network. What would you have had without it? He knew the answer. He had thought about it many times in 3 weeks. Without Claire's 4 days of silent observation, Griffin team would have gone into that ridgeline situation blind, would have attempted to push through fire. They couldn't locate from positions. They couldn't identify toward an objective that was already preparing to produce a vehicle escape. The operation would have failed. The network would still be undiscovered. Nasir would have been moved in that vehicle to a location they could not have found. Nothing, he said. We would have had nothing. Then trust the methodology, she said. It worked in Colorado because the preparation was honest. The preparation here has to be honest too. That means time. That means alone. That means I go in tomorrow. He looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. The next morning at 4:17, a helicopter flew low over the Pacific Northwest mountains, and a woman dropped out of it into darkness with a rifle, a pack, and a waterproof notebook. She landed, gathered her equipment, found her first observation position before dawn and began. She wrote the first entry as the sky started to lighten. Day 1, 05:27 hours. Perimeter established. Beginning observation. For the next 5 days, Claire Reynolds watched. She watched the facility's guard rotation, which changed in a pattern that was sophisticated but not random, and which revealed after 30 hours of documentation an underlying structure that told her things about how the facility's security thinking was organized and what assumptions it was built on. She watched the vehicle movement patterns. She mapped the communication antenna positions. She identified the observation posts and critically the gaps between them, the angles from which a person of sufficient patience could observe the facility without being observed in return. She was not observed. On day 3, she found something that she logged in her notebook with the careful precision she brought to everything, and then stared at for a long time before adding a second notation beneath it. The facility had an observation post on the northeastern ridge that was staffed intermittently, not on a regular rotation, but at irregular intervals that initially seemed random, and on day 3 revealed themselves to be correlated with activity inside the facility. When activity increased inside the northeastern post was staffed. When activity was lower, it was not. The northeastern post, when staffed, covered an arc of terrain that included the approach route she had identified on day 1 as the most favorable angle for long-range observation. They had mapped her approach before she arrived. Not her specifically, the approach. They had studied long-range reconnaissance methodology, and they had identified the terrain feature most likely to be used by a long-range operator. And they had built a responsive observation post designed to detect exactly that use. She moved on day 3, changed her position to one that was less favorable for observation, but was outside the arc covered by the northeastern post. It cost her some sideline quality. It cost her nothing in safety. And it told her something important. The facility's security design was conceptually sophisticated, but operationally rigid. They had built their defenses around categories of threat rather than around the specific adaptive reality of what an actual long-range reconnaissance specialist would actually do when she found out about the northeastern post. They had studied what long-range operators do. They had not accounted for what long-range operators do when they discovered they've been studied. She logged this. She logged everything. And on day 5, when Daniel's voice came through the low-power radio she had kept in standby for 5 days without transmitting, she had a picture that was more complete and more operationally useful than anything she had expected to be able to build. Reynolds' status. Ready, she said. We move in 6 hours. Copy, she said. I have something you need to know before you move. Talk to me. She told him about the Northeastern Post, about the correlated staffing pattern, about the terrain analysis that the facility's security design was built on, and the specific gap in that design that the analytical framework had missed. She told him in the compressed, precise language she had developed over years of converting detailed observation into briefable intelligence, not a sentence wasted, not a detail omitted. When she finished, there was a pause on the radio. Then Daniel said, they built their defense against a category, not against a person. Yes, she said, and the gap is eastern face of the facility below the thermal camera array. There is a 30-second window in the guard rotation at the eastern position, recurring every 14 minutes, during which the eastern approach is unobserved from any position. 14 minutes is long enough for a 6-person element to reach the eastern wall from the ridge if they're already staged at the correct position. Another pause. Where is the correct position? I'll walk you to it, she said, and she did. At 2300 hours under a cloud cover that Claire had predicted 48 hours earlier, based on weather pattern observation, Griffin team moved through the Pacific Northwest Mountains in the dark. Claire was forward of them, moving in communication silence, guiding them to a staging position that existed because 5 days of patient watching had found it. The operation took 44 minutes from first breach to final secure. The facility's secondary communications architecture, 22 nodes, 14 states, 8 months of accelerated operation, was dismantled at its central processing point before the people operating it understood what was happening. The 2-person technical team that Bennett had embedded with Griffin captured the active system with its encryption keys, still loaded a development that Torres, receiving the confirmation in Arlington, would later describe in her report as the single most significant intelligence capture of the operational year. 3 individuals inside the facility were taken into custody. 2 were processed as primary intelligence targets. The third was a young woman, 26 years old, with the hollow eyes of someone who has been in a wrong situation for too long and has made a decision to stop being in it, who asked, before she said anything else to the securing personnel, whether there was someone she could talk to who would actually listen. Mitchell told her yes. She talked for 4 hours. What she said reorganized for the 3rd time in 3 weeks. The understanding of what the Colorado operation had actually opened. In a staging area outside the facility at 0200, Daniel Walker stood next to Claire Reynolds, and they didn't say anything for a long moment. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some things settle better in silence, and both of them were people who understood that. Tanner walked past them carrying equipment, saw the 2 of them standing there, and kept walking without a word. He understood it too. 5 days, Daniel finally said. 5 days, she confirmed. The Northeastern Post. When you found out they'd mapped the approach. Yes. What did you think, he said, in that moment, when you realized they'd been studying it? She considered the question with the seriousness she brought to everything. I thought good, she said. Good they studied the approach, because studying the approach tells me what they think, and what they think tells me what they missed. And what they missed, she paused, is where I go. He looked at her in the dark. Is that how you always think about it? He said. It's how my first instructor taught me to think about it, she said. He said the most dangerous thing you can face is an adversary who has studied you perfectly. The second most dangerous thing is an adversary who thinks they've studied you perfectly, but stopped 1 layer short. She paused. He said the first kind is rare, the second kind is not, and the second kind defeats themselves if you're patient enough to let them. And you were. We were, she said, your team staged and moved in the dark and hit the eastern approach exactly when the window opened. I can find the window. I can't climb through it alone. Daniel was quiet. The facility was secure. The network was down. The young woman with the hollow eyes was talking, and had been talking for 4 hours, and was, by the account of the intelligence officers receiving her account, not stopping anytime soon. 3 weeks of unraveling had arrived at its operational conclusion in 44 minutes of movement through the Pacific Northwest dark. Mitchell appeared beside them. Bennett wants a radio check. He's been waiting for the secure confirm. He has it, Daniel said. He wants to hear your voice say it, Mitchell said. His words. Daniel took the radio. He pressed the transmit key. Bennett Griffin 1. Operation complete. Target secured. Network is down. Repeat, the network is down. A pause on the other end that lasted longer than transmission delay explained. Then Bennett's voice, copy that, Griffin 1. Outstanding work. Another pause. All of you. Daniel looked at Claire. She was already writing in the waterproof notebook. Not a dramatic gesture, not the ending entry of a completed mission, written with the awareness that it was an ending. Just the next entry, the next observation, the next piece of information logged in the honest, patient, methodical way that the notebook had been filled since 4 days before she walked out of the Colorado fog with a rifle and a probability estimate and 4 days of silence behind her. Some people mark their moments. They recognize the weight of what has happened, and they hold it up and let it mean something visibly. Claire Reynolds wrote it down. Because writing it down was the job. The moment was not separate from the work. The moment was the product of the work, and the work was what she respected. And respecting the work meant treating its conclusion the same way she treated every other step, carefully, honestly, and without letting the feeling of it distort the accuracy of the record. Mitchell watched her writing and said quietly to Daniel, "You know what she is?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "She's the thing that doesn't exist in the official doctrine," Mitchell said. "The capability that isn't in any training manual, because nobody built a training manual around a person who operates like that. Solo, long duration, full observation cycle, complete intelligence, architecture, developed independently, and then deployed on contact." He paused. "I've been in the teams for 20 years and I've never seen it." "Neither have I," Daniel said. "You know what's going to happen," Mitchell said. "Somebody in an office building somewhere is going to read the after-action reports from Colorado and the Pacific Northwest, and they're going to start asking what kind of program produces a person who does what she does." "Probably," Daniel said. "And she's going to be the one they study," Mitchell said. "Not the target, not the network, her." Daniel looked at Claire, still writing the notebook, resting on her knee, the pen moving in the dark with the same quiet economy as everything else she did. He thought about the first time he'd seen her, the fog moving, a figure standing in the white with a rifle pointed at the ground. 2 words, "I have the distance." He had not known then what the distance was. He had thought she meant 2,000 meters. He understood now that the distance she had was not a number. It was not a range on a ballistic table or a figure in a calculation. It was the distance that most people never cross between what they are capable of and what they are willing to do in the service of that capability. The distance between training and commitment, between potential and use, between understanding what something costs and deciding to pay it anyway. 4 days alone in the Colorado mountains, 5 days alone in the Pacific Northwest dark. The precise, patient, honest work of watching and waiting and writing things down so that when the moment arrived, the information was ready. She had always been ready. That was the thing. Looking back at the fog, at the ridge, at the notebook, at the shot that crossed 2,600 meters of Colorado mountain air, the most striking thing was not the capability. Capability could be explained. It could be trained toward, measured, documented, replicated in some approximate form by others with sufficient time and dedication. What could not be replicated was the decision made before anyone was watching to be ready for a moment that had not arrived yet and might not come. The decision to show up in a mountain range alone and build intelligence for 4 days for a situation that was not yet a situation for people she had not yet met, for a mission whose parameters she could only partially anticipate, to be the answer before anyone had asked the question. That was what Claire Reynolds was. Not a sniper who appeared from the fog. A person who had spent 4 days in the fog before anyone knew to look for her building, the answer to a question the fog was about to ask. 3 weeks after the Pacific Northwest operation, a report landed on Colonel Bennett's desk. Not a classified document, not an operational summary or an intelligence assessment. A request, handwritten on standard paper, which was unusual enough that his aide brought it to him personally, uncertain how to write it. "Bennett, read it." It was from Dr. Nasir. In careful, precise language, the language of a man who respects words enough to use them only when they carry exact weight. Nasir asked whether it would be possible to send a communication to the person whose shot had stopped the vehicle in Colorado. He did not need a name. He did not need any information about who the person was or where they were or what they did. He only wanted to communicate one thing, and he wanted it to reach the right person, and he trusted that the people reading his request would understand how to accomplish that. Bennett read the request twice. He picked up the phone. He called someone. He explained what he needed. 3 days later, a handwritten note arrived in a courier in Shalom at a Ranger Support Element facility in the Pacific Northwest. It was not addressed to a name. It was addressed to a description, the person who made the shot on October 14th. Claire was alone in her quarters when it arrived. She opened it. She read it once. Then she read it again. Nasser had written in the same careful, precise language, "I spent 11 months building a thing I did not want to build in a place I could not leave." On October 14th, I understood that someone had seen the situation more clearly than I had allowed myself to hope anyone could. The shot that stopped the vehicle was not only a shot, it was proof that the right people were in the right position. It allowed me to do the thing I had been waiting to do for 11 months. For that, which is more than I can fully express in a letter, I want to say thank you. Claire read it twice. She put it in her waterproof notebook. Not because she needed to log it, not because it was information, because some things deserve to be carried carefully in a place that is built to endure whatever the weather does. She went back to work. That was what she always did. And that, the going back the next day and the next, in the next, the quiet return to the observation post, in the notebook, in the patient accumulation of what the world offered to anyone willing to watch it long enough. That was the truest thing about Staff Sergeant Claire Reynolds. Not the 2,600-meter shot. Not the fog. Not the moment when 12 men who had stopped expecting rescue watched a woman step out of the cloud and say, "I have the distance." The truest thing was what happened before that moment and after it, in between every moment anyone would ever know about the work done, honestly in silence for its own sake, by a person who understood that excellence is not a performance for an audience, but a standard you hold yourself to when no one is watching, precisely because no one is watching, precisely because that is the only version of it that is real. She had the distance. She had always had it. She always would.